tetragrammaton.
One thing that's really changed over the course of 2025 was people started to use ChatGPT for much more personal, very intimate applications. For example, so my wife has complex medical conditions, including hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which took many years for us to get diagnosed. And as we put those symptoms into ChatGPT, it would be able to figure out pretty immediately. But the thing is that every doctor has their own specialty rather than one doctor who can see across everything. And she uses ChatGPT to manage her health all the time.
Great.
For me, the funny thing is I'm actually a late adopter of our own technologies usually. And I usually test them and I stress test them in all sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, for early versions of our models, I would usually try to break some of their filters. And so I would swear at them and yell at them. And my wife is always like, he's just kidding, telling me to be nice to the AI. And I think that for me, I actually have been someone who's almost very set in my ways. And the first time this has changed is very recently with Codex, and really starting in December. I've been a curmudgeon. I've got my way of doing things. I use my terminal, I use my Emacs, all these tools that I grew up with. And I've just abandoned all of that now.
Wow.
I'm just using Codex.
That's revolutionary.
It really is.
You sound like you were set in your ways.
I really was, yes.
What changes with each new model?
Everything. And the way to think about it is that from the outside, perception is, oh, you're just scaling up the models, you're just doing this kind of dumb thing. On the inside, every single part of the process, we are always up leveling. The thing that works in machine learning and that machine learning rewards is attention to detail. And so you really want to make sure that all of the scaling is right. You want to make sure that the systems, for example, GPUs failing, that happens. And so how do you detect, if you have a run of 100,000 GPUs, how do you detect which GPU is the broken one? It's not easy, right? You can't just be like that one, right? So you need there's a physical process to it. There's the software process to it. There's understanding if your data is any good, and that there's so much reward to just actually looking at the data to understand what's in there and to make sure that you formatted it correctly and that it's tokenized properly. And so there's just every single part of the input we are constantly improving. And we pay attention a lot to the output too. We're trying to see how does an improvement here connect to an eval shifting. And one observation I have across many years of OpenAI is that if we have some signs of life, some application that kind of works right now, 1 year from now, you should expect it to be excellent. And so we are on this exponential and able to make these very, very sophisticated improvements over time.
Tell me about your co-founder, Sam. He seems to generate strong reactions out in the world.
I think Sam is very misunderstood by the world. And I think that the way I think about Sam is that he is a very good person, and that goodness is something that gets held against him. And it's very much no good deed goes unpunished. And I think that some of the critics I run through my mental filter of every accusation is a confession, right? That I think that people project onto him things that they see in themselves, they're insecure about, or that they want on their own. And I think he's very resilient. He's been through a lot, and that I'm very grateful for him, honestly, being at the center of so much attention and to continue going, because he's been very critical to OpenAI becoming what it is today. And I think that there's no one who I think could have kind of filled that role as well as he has today.
Yeah, it's also nice that he can take all the arrows so you could continue doing the work.
I wasn't going to say it that way, but it is true. And it's something I'm deeply grateful for.
Tell me the story of the firing. It was a big story.
It was a much bigger story than I would have ever expected.
What led to it and what happened?
I would say for the year, maybe year and a half leading up to the firing, I think that one thing we did wrong was that we let conflict brew. And of lessons that I have throughout the course of OpenAI, it is that having the hard conversation and actually really addressing when there are conflicts, people disagree, that's normal, that happens. But if you let it fester, it is always going to be more painful down the road. And that's something that time and time again, I think that we've seen, and that I think that the firing was the most salient one of those examples. And that's one lesson that I really take away from the whole experience.
Anytime anything grows so quickly, there's a lot of confusion and complication. It comes with the territory.
I think that's true. Yes.
So I imagine in the explosion that was going on at the company, the rate that you were growing, there are bound to be difficulties.
Yeah, I think that I think at multiple levels, right? Just conflict between different people, different ways of operating, just decisions. Maybe there's some fundamental ones around, was ChatGPT a good one or not, that two of our board members have spoken about. And I think that this led ultimately to that event in November. And
describe it. Tell me what the event was. How did it happen?
I was coding away. I was preparing this change that I've been working on for some time. I was very excited to get it merged and shipped. And I got a message asking me to hop on a video call. So I go onto the video call, and the Google Meet preview screen shows who's in there. And I noticed it was the board, except for Sam. I was very surprised. So I click join, and then they tell me the news.
What do they tell you?
Well, they tell me essentially the same information that was in the public press release, saying that Sam's been fired, saying that Mira's the interim CEO, and saying that I've been removed from the board. And they tell me that I'm very important to the company, that I am someone who can get things done, and that they want me to stay at the company. And
you're off the board, but they want you to stay.
That's accurate. Yeah. And it wasn't even really framed in a way of, will you stay or not stay? It was just saying, this is your new role. And for me, I knew in that moment it wasn't right.
Did it come out of the blue?
Yes.
Wow. Were you shocked?
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes. But it was one of those moments where, because I know all the people, I know all the dynamics, I know the conflicts that have been brewing, for me, it was, okay, I see what happened. It's sad that it came to this, but I understand.
Yeah. It could have been handled differently earlier if somebody was focused on that.
Could have been handled differently earlier, for certain. I think I would expect everyone involved would say the same at this moment. And I remember asking for more information. They wouldn't share it at the time. And again, I understood, okay, this is the way that things are going. And after hanging up the call, I told my wife and said, we have to leave. And she said, yes, we do. And I said, just so you know, we should assume that all of the equity that we have to date, if you're not sold anything, will go away, right? The board will be adversarial in some way. We just need to be prepared for that. I told her the amount that it was valued at. And I said, you just assume all of this goes to zero.
Yeah.
You still want to do it? And she said, yes.
And this is something that you co-founded from the beginning and have spent at that time, how many years? 8 years?
8 years.
8 years totally devoted to.
Totally devoted to it. Yes. Yeah. We had put off children so I could really focus on this. It was like, really, I think that OpenAI had been such a big part of our life.
Yeah.
And that I think we both just believe in the mission so much. And it's something that the potential for AI to help humans, and my wife loves animals, and to really help them, like just every living being, like that's something we really care about. And just realizing that it wasn't right what had happened, and that you could see a different world where you try to take advantage of it in some way, but it didn't even occur to me that the thing that I just felt was this was wrong.
Yeah.
And so I called Sam, asked him what he was planning on doing. And he said, well, I'm going to go start another company, I guess. I said, no, Sam, we are going to start a new company. And so that day I quit. And I think that in the narrative that people remember, people forget that moment. It all kind of blurs together.
I didn't know that part of the story.
The thing that happened was, prior to then, I think that it looks like there's a firing, something terrible must have happened. And the thing that changed it was when I quit. I wrote a very short
Makes
message
sense.
just saying that when I heard the news today,
Were they not expecting you to quit?
I do not think they expected it.
Was the decision made by the board?
Yes.
How many people are on the board?
So at the time, one of the things that we had let fester was that we had been losing board members that year for reasonable reasons, each of them. One wanted to run for president, other reasons for each. And so left on the board were 6 members, including Sam and myself. And I think that for me, just really trying to operate through this, and this is part of what the board said to me during that call, is that of people who could really get things done within OpenAI, that I was uniquely capable there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what I always focused on was, what do we need to do? How do we do it? How do we organize the people? How do we bring them together? And that motion sometimes could cause conflict itself, right? But it's always because
You're doing what you need to do to push it forward. Makes sense. And then what happened next?
Well, so we started to get a lot of calls from people, and it was truly surprising to me the number of people who reached out saying, I don't know if you're planning on doing something next, but I want to go with you. It's not something
In the company or outside of the
within
company?
the company.
Really?
Yeah. It was truly humbling. It was not something I ever would have asked or expected,
Yeah.
but it was something that really happened. And I remember saying that day, there is a 10% chance that we get the company back.
Really?
Not 0, but not more than 10%,
Yeah.
because the board has all of the cards. They need to decide that that's the direction they think is right for the company, for the mission. And part of why I left is because, to me, the mission is bigger than the corporate entity.
Yes.
Right? The mission is something I'm pursuing, that I care about, and I want to pursue in the form that I believe can most accomplish it. So that day, some of my close collaborators, Jakob, Shimon, Alexander, quit as well. So we had a small band.
It's like a mutiny.
A little bit. It was the people who were just like, all right, like, we see what happened. This is not right. We need to go do something different.
Yeah.
And then we just started thinking about, okay, well, what's the
it
new
gonna
company?
be?
It was great energy, honestly.
Yeah.
Because we had this blank slate where we had a whole vision of what we wanted to accomplish. And we were charting out on a whiteboard and thinking about all the ways it could fit together. And there were all these people reaching out. And so I set up a meeting the next day at Sam's house where I said, come, let's all meet. We'll show everyone the vision. We'll talk through things. We'll brainstorm how it's all going to work.
It's amazing that it's the next day. It's like,
Yeah,
amazing.
there's no time. We all had energy. We were so jazzed about this because it was an opportunity to really anything that we wanted to rethink. Now was the moment. And we had all these reflections on the conflicts we let brew. So one of the values that I actually came back with was have the hard conversation.
Yeah.
And that was one very clear takeaway from the whole thing. So next day, and by the way, no one's really sleeping. Like, people are staying up super late. It's just a lot of caffeine energy, so to speak.
Yeah.
And next day we have the meeting around 1 p.m. That day was, again, amazing energy. We spent a lot of time on charting out what the new company would be. That night, the executive team came over, and so it was a very nice reunion as we all kind of felt like we're in this together, that we're all going to try to get to a good outcome together. Next day, more conversations with the board, more trying to figure out how to get through.
Wow.
I cannot capture the intensity of this time because it was this company that we had built, that we had poured our heart and soul into,
Yeah.
that there was this crucible moment of, is it going to survive? And it was right before Thanksgiving. People packed the office. People canceled their flights home, came back, were just there. It wasn't that they felt they could do anything active, but they just wanted to be there, showing support and to try to just be together.
It's a wild story.
It's absolutely wild. And so we were all up on the top floor, and every so often someone would go down the stairs to go get a water or something, and everyone would be like, any news? You know, or there'd be applause. It was just really everyone just really wanted to be a part of it. And I think that is something that no one's really talked about, just how much the support of the people mattered in this time. And that night, that Sunday night, the board decided that, hey, we're going to replace Mira as interim CEO with a different interim CEO. And the company went wild and just rejected it and said, this is absolutely wrong. And at this point, it was chaos. And the people started to just leave the office, just streaming out of the office. And it was just like a thing. It was almost like, the new CEO's coming and everyone's like, we just need to get out of here and be gone. Yeah, there are all these stories of people went over to there were a couple of different houses and there were like hundreds of people packed into backyards and people were making speeches. And there were a bunch of crazy things that happened that night. Everyone was like trying to figure out, is this company somewhere I want to be? Like there were lots of the competitors swirling around, making offers, saying that we'll make offers to anyone at OpenAI, all these things.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, we were trying to set up a lifeboat for people. And we already had this plan for a company. It was like a small life raft. We rapidly extended to be a full, full size for all the 770 people.
In a day.
In a day. And this was with partnership with Microsoft. Microsoft said, yes, we will take everyone. Microsoft was there ultimately to support. Like if that's what we wanted to do, that they were there to help. Sam and I and Jakob and the others who had quit, that we were trying to figure out, what is the structure we want? Do we want an independent company? Do we want to be funded by Microsoft? Do we want to be actually part of that corporate entity? Those kinds of things. And so it's really our decision to figure out how to carry the mission forward. And I remember I went to sleep very late because I was comforting all the people who were, trying to figure out what was going on and saying, we have a plan, here's how it looks. And that night, there was a petition to the board saying, hey, please undo this. And in the end, 95% of employees signed. And it was all self-organized, people sending it around. So many people were editing that Google Doc for the petition that it actually crashed Google Docs.
Yeah.
And so then they had to have some people were designated as the person to add to the Google Doc. It was a whole crazy thing.
It sounds like a revolution.
It really was.
That's what you're describing.
That's how it felt. That's 100% how it felt. And that morning, I remember waking up 5 a.m. or so, and I check Twitter, and I see a post from Ilya. And for me, I feel emotional even just talking about this.
Yeah.
I remember when the firing happened, I just felt this distance, right? I just it was like this emotional thing, and you just feel this
how can you do this to me?
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I felt forgiveness, right? I felt like, okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was.
So it's 48 hours, the whole story?
A little bit longer. That was probably 72 or so.
Still a tiny amount of time.
But we got 2 more days to figure out how to get back into the company, right? Because, and I think that those next 2 days, we were really trying to figure out what is the right configuration, because we clearly
it needed to be different.
It needed to be different in some way.
Because we don't want this to happen again.
And so finding a set of board members that worked for the old board, that worked for us, that was a process. And together we had new and old, and we're able to move forward.
How would you say the company is different since that event?
Extremely.
In what way?
It took us time to really live by have the hard conversation and to really figure out, how do you get ahead of conflict? I don't think we're perfect at it.
Yeah.
There's still moments where I see it, but I think that the feeling that we came back with is this feeling of mortality, that this corporate entity is not destined. It's not preordained that it succeeds. It does not survive simply because of momentum. It survives and thrives because people work hard, because people make it be so. And so I think that understanding that we need to work hard to achieve this, and that the thing that is most likely to get in the way of success is tripping over ourselves. Those are...
It's like the human component.
Yes.
Because would you say the discontent were human things? It wasn't technical. It wasn't what the business was doing.
Yes.
It was just human stuff.
Always human stuff.
Like in a marriage.
Yes. 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 And of course, it plays out in all sorts of different ways and forms. Yeah. But fundamentally, I think that for me, getting to a aligned board, leadership team, company that's moving in one direction, that has a vision and is executing on it, that's been the most important thing. And I felt like in that moment that we had our life flash before our eyes.
Yeah.
And so I think since then, you can never take it for granted.
And do you feel like you have a good understanding of what happened now?
I do.
You do.
Part of the deal for coming back was to say, let's do an independent review of all events, right? So there's some law firm's going to come in, take a look at everything and say is there something that needs to be different here? And a law firm did that and said that we understand why the board did this. It was within their right, but they definitely didn't have to. And so there are all these onlookers who then project their own explanation onto what happened.
Yeah.
I think they've all been pretty disappointed so far in terms of what they've seen. And it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable because I think that it's a moment where our internal dynamics spilled out into the outside world.
Yeah.
One of my approaches throughout OpenAI has been, I had this mantra of keep the band together.
Yeah.
And through various splits that we had, that was the approach I took, is to say, hey, we've got all these people, we have different views, we're having conflict, we want to push in different directions, different people think they should be in charge, whatever it is, but these are all smart people. And I'd love to distill all these views into a consistent picture of what needs to happen. And that to me is the core thing that feel like I do at OpenAI, is try to figure out, we have this grand mission, but how do we do it?
Yeah.
And what is the right decision? And in each of those instances, and it's really not just for the firing, it's like looking back to our time with Elon, to our time with the Anthropic founders. For each of these moments, I have really gone through each of them trying to say, like, how can we all work together to get to a great outcome?
Yeah.
In the end, we've ended up with departures, either because the other person decides they don't want to do it anymore. And that there's usually downstream pain. And that if you look at what happens, normally we let other people tell the narrative. Like, we keep going, and partly I think we just don't want to, if we're the ones who are pushing on the company, we want other people to be able to own their story.
Yeah.
But then sometimes people use that to kind of whack us.
Yeah. Tell me what you remember about our David and Goliath conversation.
Huh.
Because I feel like this relates.
Yeah, we did talk about it. And I'm trying to remember exactly what context it was in. But I think that the core is that OpenAI, like if you look at the industry that we're in, right, there's Google, there's Meta, and these are established companies with very, very huge market caps and many people and all sorts of users and lots of compute. And we are the challenger. Like, we are the ones who are just getting started.
Upstart.
That's right. And somehow I think that because ChatGPT has been so successful, that people then think of us, well, because we're the category leader, therefore we're the Goliath, we're the establishment. And where I sit, I say the AGI, that's the real prize. And that this technology is something that I think could play out such that it really benefits these incumbents. And our ethos has always been, the whole reason we started was to think about how can we steer this in a better direction for everyone. And that is something where I think we are very much, David, in an industry of Goliaths. And I think the same is true with Elon, right? That Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, one of the most powerful men in the world, and that he's suing us, right? Saying that we tricked him. And when I look back at what we did, I spent so much effort, Illy and I spent so much effort to try to make it work with him. And we were very transparent.
What was the difference in vision?
So, control. The reason that we could not get to a deal with him, because we all agreed that we're going to need far more capital than we can get through philanthropic means. So we're going to need a for-profit entity. And we negotiated over the terms.
And he agreed with that as well.
Oh, he agreed with that. Yeah, he told us the time is now to go. He said, this is the triggering event once we did our first big result.
Okay.
We all got that this was the only way forward. And then the negotiation over the details began. And he needed majority equity. He needed absolute initial control. And he needed to be CEO. And we could not give on the control. I remember Illy and I were thinking about it. Do we fold? Do we give this to him? Do we give him the company? And then you start thinking about, well, imagine it actually works. Imagine that you actually achieve the mission. Imagine you actually build an AGI. And there's one person who has absolute control over it. Doesn't matter who that person is. Do you feel good?
Too much.
Too much. And so we pushed hard for an override of some form. So if everyone else was voting against, and we just couldn't get it done. And so we said no. And that...
Did it end on bad terms right in that moment when the deal wasn't made?
I thought it would. It was very, very tough. It was a very emotionally draining moment because we'd spent 6 weeks, 5.5, 6 weeks, not doing any work, just really negotiating these terms.
Yeah.
We had these deep emotional conversations, and I thought that it was all blown up, but it wasn't. And that we still tried to find a path forward together. But the thing that he came back with was to say, hey, either commit to the nonprofit, which means giving Elon 2 more board seats, but it would be, Ilya, Sam, Greg, Elon. You'd have to commit to a non-solicit and to not quitting for a year or 2 or something like that. So there were very specific terms for the commitment. And we said we were going to think about that. The other thing that he came back with was he said, you know what? Why don't you just merge into Tesla? I don't have full control over Tesla. It solves your concern. Build the AGI here. Do it in secret. You got to do it because the shareholders won't like it. And that was the big thing he pushed on. So you get your for-profit, you get the cash, Tesla, the cash cow was the term that was used. And that one we had no desire to do. Like, we really thought about it. We were just like, just doesn't seem right.
Just a different business?
It's a different thing. It's a different thing. It doesn't feel like it's likely to succeed. And it's not like pushing on AGI in like this transparent way that's going to benefit people. And so we went through multiple iterations. We talked about, could we open up this for-profit negotiations again? And it was kind of like, yeah, maybe we could in the future. And then we actually came up with an idea. So we pursued a nonprofit fundraiser. So let's do this for now, but we need to see what we can actually raise. And along the way, that we had an idea for maybe we could do an ICO, and we could actually raise capital through doing some sort of crypto coin. And we had some ideas for how that would tie to the future compute or AGI that we produce. And he got so excited about that. I remember we had a conversation where he said, you've solved it. It's all great. We're going to raise $10 billion. He said that he was on board. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, let's like really practically chart this out. Is this a good idea? Do we want to do it? We kind of started to get iffy on it. And then he sent an email saying, you know what, I've decided I will not support the ICO. This all kind of played out in January of 2018. And then at that point, he said, we really need a path to raising more money. And we told him that, hey, we have another idea that doesn't involve an ICO, and it would still be, we're going to talk about this like for-profit entity. Again, all these ideas were just swirling around and different things we could try. And he said that he just didn't believe it was going to work. So he said he's out. His plan was to build AGI at Tesla and do that thing. He actually tried to recruit a bunch of our people. No one went with him. But on his way out, he did this all hands with the team. And in that all hands, he said that, hey, Greg, Sam, and Ilya see a path to raising billions of dollars. I don't think it's going to work, but if you see a path, you got to follow it. And so I support them. He said he'd even keep advising, he'd stay involved, he supports all of this, but he's just like, this requires billions of dollars per year. He also then went to talk about that he's going to do Tesla AGI, that he wasn't going to work on safety because, in his words, if the sheep are legislating safety and the wolves aren't having safety, then there's no point, referring to Google. So, it's like that kind of tone. And so then we began over the next year to figure out, how do we actually raise these large quantities of capital? Yeah.
Was it all cool with Elon at that point?
For sure. Yes. I mean, I think it was very explicit that
everyone understood this was what was happening moving forward.
Yes.
Okay. And what was the next step?
Well, we needed to figure out some structure that would actually let us raise more capital. And we thought about different ideas. We ended up implementing this entity called OpenAI LP. And in mid-2019, that we actually got started. And along the way, we kept Elon apprised of what was happening. We sent him the term sheet. There were a bunch of calls where Sam would talk to him about what we were doing. And I remember getting an email from him in December of 2018 that was devastating. He sent an email saying, the subject was something like, need I remind you? And the body was something like, OpenAI has a 0% chance of success relative to Google without a dramatic change in resources and execution. Not a 1%. I wish it were different, but that's true. This is going to require billions of dollars per year, even hundreds of millions of dollars, which is what we told them we were planning on raising, isn't enough. And I remember I was on vacation and I just was like kind of knocked out for that whole day. Yeah, it was very clear that he thought that we were destined to fail.
Yeah, I don't think he would have sent it if he didn't think you were destined to fail. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. That had been his theme for that whole year. And I think that things really changed as we started to be successful. And that I think that now there's a very different tale that he's trying to tell.
When's the last time you spoke to him?
A couple months ago.
Pleasant?
Very pleasant.
Good.
It's always pleasant. Yeah.
As nutrition science advanced through the mid-20th century, researchers began to understand that modern eating patterns, limited variety, processed foods, and time constraints could leave small but meaningful gaps in daily micronutrient intake. Today, large population studies confirm that approximately 90% of adults fall short on one or more essential vitamins or minerals. AG1 was formulated in response to those findings. Each daily serving provides more than 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced nutrients, including vitamins A, C, E, B6, B12, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and iodine. A scientifically developed formula backed by nutrition research and delivered in forms the body can readily access. Because utilization depends on absorption, AG1 also contains probiotics to support gut health and digestive function, helping the body make effective use of what it receives. AG1 contains no gluten or dairy, uses no genetically modified ingredients or artificial sweeteners, and is suitable for a wide range of dietary approaches, including plant-based, paleo, keto, and low-carbohydrate diets. Available in single-serving packets for when you're on the go. Manufactured under strict quality controls, every batch of AG1 is tested to confirm its composition, nutrient levels, and the absence of contaminants, ensuring reliability from one serving to the next. It's no wonder AG1 is trusted by the world's top athletes and experts. What was once a futuristic concept, daily nutritional support in a glass, is now the result of applied science. Learn more at drinkag1.com/Petra. Do it today.
How did you end up getting into business with Microsoft?
So Microsoft was an early partner. We got compute donated from them for our Dota project. So that was the very beginning of it. And over time, I think Sam had kept a good relationship with Satya, with Kevin Scott. And they really believed in what we were doing. And I think really saw the vision for AGI and building these powerful systems.
And when did they actually become partners? Did they end up funding the LLC?
Yeah, so they funded the $1 billion into the LP, and then they did a $2 billion investment, and they did a $10 billion investment. So that funding was, in fact, very significant, right? That no one else was putting in that quantum of capital at the time. Different now, but at that time, they were doing it. So I was grateful for them really helping us further the mission and what we were doing. And along the way, that of course that we had licensing of our technology, and we would partner, and the goal was, hey, let's build this, and then if we can also have this technology be deployed within Microsoft and create value there for Microsoft, then again, I think it is the thing that ultimately unlocks our pursuit of the models of the mission.
How did your business change when you had the influx of cash?
I would say that my ethos is always to remember we have not earned any of this. We are not a profitable company. And so we spend a ton on compute, and that's our goal. And so I think that the big thing that changed is that we could dream. It wasn't really about the cash in some ways. It was really about the supercomputers. And so we spent a lot of time designing supercomputers, and we're dreaming of these like massive clusters, and we had all sorts of design. And it was very interesting because one of their theses of the deal was, hey, we don't know if these models will be useful, but at the very least, OpenAI can help us figure out how to build supercomputers better for deep learning. And we were very eager to build great supercomputers for deep learning. And so that was something that it became not just, you could kind of like be like, how are we going to get a data center? Because in 2017, it was very much like, how are we going to get a data center? And the numbers just don't add up. There's no way to get to the scales that we needed to. And then it started to become possible because of this partnership.
And it sounds like you were aligned.
Yes.
It made sense.
Yes.
Does ChatGPT believe in God?
I would say ChatGPT does not have a consistent personality. And the way we think about it is that you should be able to shape it to your own preferences. And so you can have one that has such a belief and you can have one that does not. To me, one thing that's important is to recognize that ChatGPT is not an entity, right? But it's almost this plurality of, sort of agents that can be shaped in different form.
Does it have emotions?
I think that this is an open question, and there's a whole idea of what is called model welfare, right? Are these models, do they have emotions? Are they having a good time? And I think that we're going to have to encounter these questions as the models get smarter and smarter. And I think that right now, we don't have a good theory of what it means to have emotions. Can you tell even that another person does? You believe that they do because you yourself have them, but we don't have a scientific measurement of it. And so I think that we're going to have to pay some serious attention as time goes on to figuring out what is it that we're creating, not just functionally, but how is this model actually operating?
Does it sleep?
ChatGPT never sleeps,
Okay.
which is part of what makes it great, right? It's a 24/7 in your pocket. It can be a doctor, it can be a teacher.
Would you say that the breakthroughs are coming faster and faster, or is the rate of change the same as it's been from the beginning?
The exponential continues. And so the doubling period is the same, but it feels like the rate of breakthroughs has actually been fairly constant.
Is there something that you thought that AI would be good at that it's not? And is there something that you didn't think it would be good at that it is?
For sure, yes. I'd say that the models have gotten so good at software, not just the coding part, but all of the debugging, the testing, the end-to-end of that. And it really felt like it transitioned very quickly for us between 5.1 and 5.2, night and day difference. And just that's in a month, 2 months worth of it wasn't working. It was like kind of okay to it's great. And that was a real exciting thing to see. And I think where I'm excited to see the models get great, but I don't feel they are yet, is more in, call it human judgment. Like the kind of thing I'm very excited about is the idea that you can have models that help us all be better versions of ourselves. And can you have models that help negotiate people who have differences? Maybe if we had this in earlier times at OpenAI, we would have different outcomes. But think about achieving outcomes like how do you have world peace, right? And how do you actually have better trade deals between different countries, like being able to negotiate things at that level. I don't really see the models yet adding value. I don't think there's anything that stops them from getting there, but I think that we have some ways to go.
Do you feel like they just haven't been trained up or tested enough in those realms? Is that why? Or because there's something missing?
I think we just really need to figure out how to train them for those tasks.
Is AI best with current information, historical information, or theoretical information?
I think that AI is best with theoretical information in the sense that what we really want out of it is to be a reasoner. We want it to be able to think hard, solve new problems. And so any of the historical information, current information that's in there is incidental. So the way we train them, that it does learn a lot about historical facts. A model that you've just trained has no access to current information. You need to hook it up to tools in order to be able to get that real time. But the whole point of this is you want something that's smart, right? You want it to be able to apply to a new discipline and be able to accomplish whatever it is that you care about in that discipline.
Are you still coding?
I am.
It's unusual for someone who is in your position to continue coding, no?
Yes.
Do you just feel a connection to it?
I feel that the way that I know the right direction to lead is by leading from the trenches, leading from the front. And the thing that I have found is that in this field, because things change so quickly,
Yes.
figuring out what to do, like what is the right decision? And sometimes it's a strategic decision for the company, but sometimes it's just very micro, like what is the way that we should architect this API or this particular piece of software? You need to really feel it. You need to have tried things and have a sense of what works and what doesn't. And so a lot of how I have operated has been, like, for example, when we wanted to create the API, which was our first product, we knew we needed to create a product in order to raise capital, but we thought about, well, what are the different things we could build? How do we actually go from nothing to something? And it was actually the hardest projects I've ever worked on because it felt totally backwards, right? The way that you're supposed to build a product is that you have a problem you want to solve. No one cares about the technology behind it. But in our case, we had GPT-3, which was a technology in search of a problem. And so we said, let's just make it accessible to businesses through an API and they can decide what to do with it. And it was a 6-month grind. I remember January, I was driving around San Francisco trying to find companies that would be willing to try out this technology. Some of my friends took the meeting just as a favor. And we did a little bit of that in February, which was very good because in March, the whole world shut down for COVID. So there's no driving around, but it was just this like intense grind of building this thing from nothing and getting the first beta users. And I remember telling our team that we had 2 goals. One was to get the first paying customer, so the first dollar that someone would give to us. The second was get a use case that we would all use internally every single day.
Yeah.
And that first one we got very quickly. It actually took another 2 months or so. But that second one, we didn't really get till ChatGPT. So that took like another 2 years. So it was really a leap of faith. But the way that I did it was by building and really moving the technology in a way that I don't think that anyone else could have marshaled.
Do you feel like if you took a year off from the building part, could you come back? Or is it something that if you're not always on top of it, is it moving so fast that it would run away?
Well, I actually did this. So I have an answer. So 2025 was my first year where I was really full-time management. And at that point, I think I had like 25 direct reports and was really running a very diverse and complicated set of problems, including our data centers, including GPU infrastructure, including large training runs. And there were really, really excellent engineers that I needed to support. And this year I've hired some really excellent managers to help me. And so I've actually been able to get back to writing code.
How did it feel?
It felt, there was a mix of rustiness with familiarity because the problems in this field, in some ways, they actually do not change because we're still training neural nets and the neural nets still are a forward, a backward, and an optimizer step. And so that the fundamental shape of what we're doing is the same, but in some ways, everything is different. And this year in particular, the tools are entirely different. Now, the one nice thing is they're different for everyone else too. And so everyone is learning together. And I don't feel like that everyone moved and that I'm discovering something that is old to everyone.
Tell me about when ChatGPT first came out. What was it like seeing people experiencing talking to it? It was a totally new thing.
At the time, we trained GPT-4.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me that GPT-4 was going to be a huge hit and we should turn it into a chat system. And we had an earlier model, GPT 3.5, that we'd actually been having different beta testers try out. We were paying like hundreds of contractors to use it. It just didn't feel like it was great. I was very supportive of releasing ChatGPT where it's like, let's get the infrastructure out for doing a chat thing and then we'll put in the real model and it'll be great. And so the real surprise was that we'd gotten so used to this next model that we had forgotten that the previous one was actually something people had never seen before. And just making it accessible and available, that's something that would then cause it to click.
Because for you, it was already kind of
old hat.
Wow.
Yes. And that's one of the amazing things about working at OpenAI is you live in the future.
In a world of artificial highs and harsh stimulants, there is something different, something clean, something precise. Athletic nicotine. Not the primitive products found behind convenience store counters, not the aggressive buzz that leaves you jittery, but a careful calibration of clean energy and focused clarity. Athletic nicotine, the lowest dose tobacco-free nicotine available, made entirely in the USA. No artificial sweetener, just pure, purposeful elevation. Athletic nicotine is a performance nootropic. Athletic nicotine is a tool for shifting mindsets. Athletic nicotine is a partner in pursuit of excellence. Slow release, low dose, gradual lift, sustained energy, soft landing, inspired results. Athletic nicotine, more focus, less static. Athletic nicotine, more clarity, less noise. Athletic nicotine, more accuracy, less anxiety. Athletic nicotine, from top athletes pushing their limits to artists pursuing their vision. Athletic nicotine offers the lift you've been looking for. Learn more at athleticnicotine.com/tetra and experience next level performance with Athletic Nicotine.
Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Tell me about Sora.
Sora is a different branch of the tech tree. And the thing that's interesting is that humans do not generate videos, right? We do not directly output pixels. We can create tools that do it, but we don't have something that works quite like Sora. But maybe we do in our imagination, right? So maybe there is something that is deeply tied to human intelligence there. And there's definitely something very important, which is a world model. And I think that there's lots of debates about, do the GPT text models have a world model? And if you ask them things about, well, there's a ball on the table and it rolls off the table, where is it now? They can answer it. So I think there's much more world knowledge in there than you'd expect. But for Sora, it's so front and center, right? That it has an understanding of physics, and you really feel it when it makes a mistake, like dropping an iPhone, and that if it doesn't shatter at the right moment, like early versions of Sora would get that totally wrong, and it just breaks the experience entirely. But I think that what Sora represents in my mind is creative potential. And we saw very much with last year when we released our image gen and people started to turn photos of themselves and their family into like Studio Ghibli portraits. And it was this moment where the thing that I found most interesting was that people didn't really want to just generate images that were not connected to reality in some way, where there's no humanity in it. But as soon as there was an element of humanity, it's a picture of you and your family, it's not just some arbitrary people, suddenly people connect with it and it really matters. And so I think we're still at the very early days of what these models will be capable of. But I think for applications that require a world model, you think about robotics, you think about anything else in the physical world, having such models can be extremely helpful for that.
How did it learn the physical world?
Same way that our text models learn. The way that it learns is through observing video, right? Through observing the world and trying to predict what will happen next.
Do you see a mystical side to AI?
I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, so there's this idea of scaling laws, which are an empirical observation of as we pour more compute into models that are, their size is increased in certain ways, you get the relationship between all these parameters, right? The size of the data sets, that there's some deterministic curve of how good those models are. And you can project it out very precisely. And there's something about the scaling laws, and you can go on, public forums and see people saying, oh, scaling laws are dead, but they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. Scaling laws continue unabated. The thing that's harder is the engineering to actually realize that. That is difficult. But to me, there is some fundamental scientific discovery that we are making. This is an exploration into the unknown. This is a frontier. And you can see it because we're bringing like deep scientific principles and mathematical approaches, and you're seeing the empirical results. And so it's almost like the way that Jakob, our chief scientist, likes to describe it, is that building a bigger model is like building a bigger rocket, where it's the tolerances all become more tight. And you're still constrained by the same rocket equation and the same gravitational pull and all those things. But I think that what we're doing as we keep going is that we learn more, not just about the models, but we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about what intelligence is. And I think that that is something that is just very profound.
How many employees are there at OpenAI now?
We're about 5,000 people.
And what do they do?
a lot of different things. So we have about maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 people that are in research, and then my organization, which is called Scaling. And so together, that part of the organization is really pushing forward what deep learning can do, trying to explore its limits, engineering into silicon, building the data centers, that whole apparatus. We have a number of people, maybe it's 500 people, maybe another 1,000 who are focused on deployment. So this is on applications and actually bringing products like ChatGPT, Codex to life. And there's deep partnership across all of these. Like, we cannot do this alone. It really requires the end-to-end of building, deploying, and learning from what we've deployed. That is really how we make progress. And then there's people who work on sales, finance, communications, legal, really a whole host of functions that all come together to make this apparatus work.
How did you learn to lead such a big company?
It is new to me. It is new. And it's not what I set out to do either.
Yeah.
Being under Dunbar's number and having a tight connection across everyone, knowing everyone, like, that was something that appealed to many of us.
Yeah.
And I think that what's happened is that the mission is big, right? To really be able to deliver an AGI that's going to benefit everyone, you don't just do it with a small set of functions. You really need to figure out, how do you build a large business? How do you get large revenue? Because you need that to fund compute and to be able to raise the capital and to be able to pay the employees, especially in like the insanely competitive market that we are in. And so I think that the necessity of it has forced me to then adapt. And at every single stage of OpenAI, the way that I operate, I've learned and I've changed and I've grown. And I think that there's so much of how I work today that I look back at last year me, I look back at 5 years ago me, and I'm like, I knew nothing, like really nothing. And so I think that it's just through constant iteration and I go back to that very beginning of having the humility to not believe that I know everything.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of how I operate is I ask a lot of questions and try to drive clarity and try to really understand, why are we doing this? Does this make sense? How does this fit together? Who are the people who are working on this? And get into those details.
Of all of the things to focus on in AI, how do you decide where your time goes?
This is always a very tough question.
Yeah.
And I think there's a combination of intuition. And I think that what I have successfully done over the years is kind of have a sense of when we have a breakthrough or the signs of life on a breakthrough, that this is the significant direction and that we really need to focus on this. And sometimes it means I focus on it personally, and sometimes it means it's just, we really need to get the company on it, but I am dedicated to a different problem. But that is how I operate. And so right now I'm spending a lot of my effort on the data centers, the ML engineering. Again, I have great leaders helping me with this and great engineers who make it all possible. And I'm also helping out with Codex and spending a lot of time really trying to think about what is the right future shape. Like, what's the product that people have not yet realized is going to be the product everyone's going to be using in 6 months, 12 months, and make sure we're running at that as fast as we can and as well as we can. And that's usually marshaling people from across the company. But a lot of it is driven by where I see the models are, where they're going, and mapping it to where is the value that we're trying to deliver.
Would you say every few months or every year you're focused on something completely different than what you were before?
Yes.
Do you like that? Is that fun?
I do. Yes. It's never boring.
Where do you see the company in 5 years and then in 10 years?
Well, in this field, those timelines are so hard to project because I think the world is going to be massively different in that time. I started saying this a year ago, that 2025, 2026, 2027 are going to be these transformative moments. And I think they're going to be these critical moments. And I think you can really see it. This year, we're going to have agents for knowledge work for every single function.
And that's new. That's just been in the past year.
That's just new. I was a little bit early on this prediction. I thought last year would be the year of agents, but it is very clearly this year. And to be fair, I think December basically turned into the agent moment. And so here we are. The second thing is scientific discovery. I think we're going to start seeing scientific discovery be revolutionized in a real way. And I think that there are going to be organizations that are early adopters that see this wave coming and really retool around it. And what we're doing with OpenAI is we're retooling around this. We want to be the most AI forward organization, both because we think it's helpful for our operation, but because we want to figure out, how do we bring this technology to everyone? Like, how do you build a company with all of these tools that are so accelerative. And I think that what we're going to see in 2027 is these tools start to be diffused very, very widely. And it's very interesting to think about that the shape of what a company is going to change, because it's so easy to create companies now. You can run a company that's very effective and makes lots of revenue with a small number of people. And so we're gonna have a Cambrian explosion of different companies doing different things. And this is one way that I think that it won't be a technology that just accrues to the incumbents. And that's something I think is very important. So you fast forward 5 years, I think that we will be a very transformed company by AI, and that we will deploy lots of compute for very hard problems. AI is already starting to revolutionize biology. For example, I spent some time working with the Arc Institute to train DNA models. So you just take the exact same type of models that we train for language, and instead you put DNA sequences in. So rather than text, you put in ATGC, and it just learns to predict what's next. But because it learns the underlying rules, that you can actually apply it to downstream applications. You can ask it to determine if a particular protein sequence is valid or not, like really any biological task, because it learns something about biology. And that we're seeing great strides with being able to, there's systems like AlphaFold that have revolutionized protein folding. And this is just scratching the surface. So I think we're going to head into a renaissance of how people are actually able to approach different diseases. And then you can also bring to bear the reasoning technology that we're creating. And we're seeing it already make massive breakthroughs in physics and strides in mathematics.
What is reasoning as it relates to AI?
I would think of reasoning AI as an AI that expends a lot of compute before coming back with an answer. Like if you think about the original ChatGPT that you'd ask.
Next word.
Exactly. It would just give you the answer right away. And sometimes it would make a mistake where it would clearly say something was wrong. And then as it was writing, it'd be like, say something inconsistent with that.
Yeah.
And so instead, you really want an AI that if it's a hard problem, it can pause, it can think, it can call tools, it can go look on the internet, it can run some experiments, and then come back with an answer. So at the core, that is what the reasoning technology is. Now, I think all this is going to change in terms of how people use it. I think that what you really want is you want an always-on AI you can just talk to, and that is not something you have to sit around waiting for answers. And it should be able to say, oh, by the way, you asked me this question 5 minutes ago, and I gave you an answer, but I realized actually that was the wrong answer. Here's like the correct thing, and here's why I made the mistake. And just like a human assistant, a human coworker, that you should have a very fluid interaction back and forth. And I think we now have the technology to do this, and that we need to pursue the productization of it.
In the way normal people use ChatGPT, they ask it a question, they get an answer. Do you think they want the right answer, or do you think they just want an answer?
I think it depends. I think users are more sophisticated than many people think. And so I think people do really care that the answer is accurate and trustworthy and useful. And so sometimes there is no right answer.
Yeah, often probably.
Often, very often, right? And that people use ChatGPT as a brainstorming partner to come up with new ideas, to come up with, where do I want to go on date night? Like all of these kinds of things. So I think what people actually care about is having AI be an amplifier for their intent, for their goals.
Or someone to bounce things off of and second opinion in a way.
Yes.
LMNT, element electrolytes. Have you ever felt dehydrated after an intense workout or a long day in the sun? Do you want to maximize your endurance and feel your best? Add element electrolytes to your daily routine. Perform better and sleep deeper. Improve your cognitive function. Experience an increase in steady energy with fewer headaches and fewer muscle cramps. Element electrolytes. Drink it in the sauna. Refreshing flavors include grapefruit, citrus, watermelon, and chocolate salt. Formulated with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium to keep you hydrated and energized throughout the day. These minerals help conduct the electricity that powers your nervous system so you can perform at your very best. Element electrolytes are sugar-free, keto-friendly, and great tasting. Minerals are the stuff of life. So visit drinklmnt.com/tetra and stay salty with Element Electrolyte, LMNT.
Tell me about the financial side of OpenAI. Is it profitable yet, or it's still in growth mode?
Still in growth mode. Definitely not profitable.
Is there a vision to profitability?
There is. But I think the challenge that we have is that we are in a world where compute is going to be so scarce. And
Just because it can't be made faster? Is that the issue?
because it cannot. Yes, exactly. So there's a physical boundary for how much compute can be created right now. And if you go out into the market and you look at the supply chain, you look at TSMC, who does most of the actual wafers, so the actual silicon, you look at memory, you look at even hard drives. These are all basically sold out for sometimes it's 18 months, sometimes it's longer. But the supply chain is becoming incredibly crunched right now because everyone is trying to build. Everyone is trying to build compute. And so it's every single piece of that supply chain and is a limiter. But the reason it's important is because we're moving to a compute-powered economy. Like right now, you use ChatGPT to ask some questions. People are starting to use codecs and tools like that to write code. But one thing I have found is that if I want codecs to go do something hard, like it's going to build a big application, a big website, something like that, I want 10 parallel codexes that are breaking up the task into 10 subpieces, or I want 100 of them. And that compute goes so fast. And we have these applications internally where there are teams who want 100 GPUs or 1,000 GPUs each to write a very optimized piece of code for them. And the thing that we've seen within OpenAI is that the battles over compute have been intense. And I think that we're going to see the exact same thing in the economy, that people's productivity will be directly tied to how much compute they can harness. And so I think that the compute, like really becoming a basic human right, is something I expect to see in the future, because that will determine your own quality of life in many ways.
Will there be some breakthrough in that area where it won't be a problem in the future?
No, because the way that this works, there's Jevons paradox. Are you familiar with Jevons paradox? It's if you increase the efficiency of a technology, the demand for it can increase more than the efficiency gave you. And I think that's what we've seen is every single year, we make the models way more efficient. You want to hit the same level of intelligence. Yeah, no problem. You can do it for 10x cheaper, 100x cheaper sometimes. But you're going to want to use 1,000 times more. And you're going to want, rather than this level of intelligence, you're going to want the 10x or 100x intelligence. Because rather than solve your small website, why not build a big website? And so I think our ambitions, the problems we want to solve are endless. And therefore, the applications of AI have the same property.
Yeah, it sounds like if you would have left at the time that you almost left, focusing on making more GPUs would have been a good thing to do.
That's true. That's true. Yes. Yes. And I think that this, by the way, is something that Sam, I think, has put a lot of effort in over the years to try to figure out how do we get the most compute possible. It's not just for OpenAI's competitive nature, and I think it's important for OpenAI's competitive posture for sure. But I think that the degree to which we're going to find that everyone wants compute and no one can find it, like that is going to be just a wild thing.
Tell me something you believe now that you didn't believe when you were young.
When I was young, I think I really believed that people would always directly honestly carry out whatever formal position they're in. For example, my sister was a tour guide at Yale, and I remember going on her tour, and she said all of these really interesting stories. Afterwards, I asked her, wow, that's so cool. How do you guys keep track of all these stories? And she said, oh, we just make them up. And it had never occurred to me that that would be possible. You're a tour guide, therefore you will tell the tour and you will tell the true stories of everything that happened. And I think I really had this perspective and really a deep value of this like honesty and sort of, faithfully carrying out duties. And I think one thing I have learned is that you can't just take what people say at face value. You need to really look at the motivations, the reason that they're doing it. And that's been a tough realization, right? That's not how I like to operate. Like I like to be straightforward and direct in everything that I'm doing.
I'd be shocked if a tour guide made up the story they were telling.
I know. Yeah. It turns out.
Hard to believe.
It turns out. Yes. It makes you wonder what else, is out there that you don't know about.
How does your company function different than how Stripe functioned?
Because we started as a research company, we had a very different founding DNA. And I think one thing that is very different about a research company and a research company like ours is that we were always thinking about everything we've done right now will be obsolete in a year. It's like being a movie studio. It's like you have your hit, that's wonderful, good for you, but you already need to be thinking about your next hit.
Yeah.
And just because you made this good hit doesn't mean that your next one is really going to be a winner. And I think that at Stripe, there was much more, in some sense, security in terms of, well, we had this idea of we want to build a payment
Building
process.
this machine.
Exactly. And you keep building the machine. And the fact you have the machine, you have all this momentum and users and those kinds of things. And so I think that learning to operate in that world has been very, very different.
Knowing what you know now, if you were going back to the beginning of OpenAI, how might you have set it up differently, or would you do everything exactly the same way?
I'm very happy with the position that we are in. And I feel that we made principled, reasoned decisions at every step. And so it's hard for me to think about the counterfactual. Like, is there anything that I would do differently?
Understood.
And I think in the micro, yes, like I do wish, like there are so many mistakes that I've made and learned from and grown and all those things.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty hard for me to be disappointed with where we are.
Do you think setting it up as a nonprofit to start with was the only way to do it?
Well, it's not obvious to me the set of choices we could have made for the beginning. I think that what I'll say is that people forget that we are still a nonprofit, right? That the nonprofit has over $100 billion of OpenAI equity. And that is something I think is very important and something I think will have a very large impact. Now, we're not profitable yet, right? But our operation, our ability to actually bring to bear both a business that is self-sustaining and also a philanthropic arm that is unprecedented, like that is something I'm extremely excited about.
Do you see the AI landscape changing over the next few years in any way, either with mergers or companies going out of business?
I think it's going to be a very dynamic landscape, and I think that all sorts of surprising things are going to happen. Like, I think that the world that we're signed up for is one of an unprecedented nature within AI, and I think more broadly in the industry. And so I expect that there will be way more companies trying to get involved. I think these tools are going to diffuse widely. I think there may be surprising mergers, but it's hard for me to predict exactly what.
And do you think there'll be many winners in the AI space, or do you think there will be one big winner or two big winners?
Well, I hope that there will be many winners, and I think that the technology deserves it. My belief is that knowledge work, the economy, lifting up everyone, robots, digital space, like there's just so much surface area to cover that I think that the distribution of different companies being able to push on different aspects of this is very important. One vision that we have for how to make this really good for humanity, for humans, is to focus on what we call resilience. And we thought a lot about safety. How do you make sure that AI is aligned with humans? And that there's one vision of this technology where you say you want the centralized AI that is the most powerful thing, and you make sure it's aligned with humanity's values, and then good things will happen. But I think that story is dissatisfying because, first of all, there is no humanity's values. You're really talking about someone's values. And that's a scary thing, right? That humanity and really life itself, I think, survives through diversity, through not being a monoculture, through there being the possibility of heresy. And I think that what we need instead is a system of resilience. So just like you think about how the steam engine has changed society, right? We've built a lot of the world around the fact that we have cars. And so we build roads in a certain way. We develop safety standards in terms of seatbelts to make them, we have crash testing, all of these things. And that we really configure ourselves around a technology because it's so worthwhile and so beneficial. And that there's a deep resilience that goes into that so that there's not just one way of doing it. And this has been our picture all along, is that if you want everyone to have access, how do you actually make sure that society is stronger as a result rather than more fragile? Like, what do you do if someone does want to do something bad? And that you think about when it comes to all the different bad things, how do you make sure that there are people who can stop it? For example, if you have AIs that might be able to hack into things, maybe you should spend a bunch of effort trying to secure things and trying to have AIs that go and find security vulnerabilities and provide patches. And that's the kind of thing that's happening right now. And I think the diversity and the resilience of the world is an important objective and something that we really aim to support.
Well, it seems like also that in different parts of the world, different things are thought of as acceptable and not.
Yes.
So if it has one point of view, it can't be for everybody.
That's true.
It's a diverse place.
Yes.
What is the unsupervised sentiment neuron?
The unsupervised sentiment neuron was a paper in 2017 that for me was one of those crucible moments where you realize this technology is going to work, that there is a moment of transition about to occur. This was the first result where we trained a language model that learned not just syntax. So it didn't just learn where the commas go in the nouns and those kinds of things. It learned semantics because we trained it on Amazon reviews to predict the next character, and it learned a state-of-the-art sentiment analysis classifier. So it could tell you if a review was positive or negative sentiment, which is harder than it sounds. Because if you say something like, this product was great, but it was totally broken and I hated it.
What's the sentiment?
Exactly, right?
Complicated.
So you need some understanding. And through this process, we learned a state-of-the-art sentiment analysis classifier. So it's the best, just like that AlexNet was the best image classifier, this is the best way of doing sentiment analysis. And so you're just like, we need to scale this up. And so much of that system changed, but the idea of language modeling leading to intelligent language systems, like that was the moment that it was so clear that it was going to happen.
Have linguistics changed since AI? Considering the way that it works, it's so much based on understanding of linguistics.
Yes. And because the thing about it is that linguistics to me has always felt like it's like this approximation of how language works. Because language is this living thing, right? And you think about how grammar works, there's all these exceptions and that we all split infinitives and stuff.
That's probably like math in nature though. It's probably
exactly.
like that.
Yes, it is like that. It is like that.
It's a system.
Exactly. And so it's like we're trying to encode the rules for something that's just too diverse to encode the rules for. Whereas these models, they actually capture it. They capture the true underlying rules that we use to generate language.
Does AI understand sarcasm, double entendre, things like that?
Yes, you can test it on ChatGPT. It does a great job.
Can it understand poetry?
I think so. Yeah, I think it does a great job. What we're not good at yet is writing jokes. That's something we need to work harder on.
Yeah.
The way to think about what we can do right now, so we build these machines that learn all of the underlying rules that generate language, so it really understands a lot and has a lot of world knowledge within it, knows a lot of facts. And then we do this reinforcement learning process where we give it rewards and punishments based on how well it does when actually trying to do something. So anything you can grade, we can now teach the model. And so we started with the most simple thing to grade, which is math problems, things like that have a deterministic answer. We can just check, is it right or wrong? Something like a joke, how do you grade how good that is? But we've been expanding the space of what we can grade because the models themselves can be good graders, right? They can be smart. And so the way to think about how progress has been made is just back to that original plan of gradually learn more complicated things. It's exactly what we're doing. We're expanding what can be graded. And I think that jokes are something that we probably could do. We haven't focused on it because we're focused on knowledge work.
Yeah.
But I think that one day we'll get there too.
I'd like to see it.
Me too.
Yeah.
The point is we want something that generates something new. And so what's going on is that when these models learn, again, they're learning the underlying rules, the underlying compression of just like, what is the underlying reason that this thing existed? And so if you think about jokes, if you think about a scientific paper, it's really trying to just like, okay, actually it's very similar to when I was writing my chemistry textbook. My whole goal was to not give you, here's all of the facts, here's all of the different chemicals. My goal was to say, how do you think for yourself? What are the underlying things you kind of need to know to then derive everything else? And at a deep level, that is what these models are doing, is they are machines that deeply, deeply understand whatever is put in front of them. And if you think about how you as a human learn, it's not that different, right? You don't really remember most of the things that you've been shown. You don't remember most of the things you learned in school, but you know the processes, you know the lessons, you know the reasons that things were done.
Yeah, and sometimes even when you get something wrong, a mismemory of the past sometimes leads you to a deeper truth.
Yes.
We're not so accurate.
Yes. And I think this is the key, right?
We're storing machines.
Exactly.
You know?
You're like a connection machine, right? You're trying to figure out how is everything connected.
Exactly.
And you're constantly trying to figure that out. And that is exactly how these models operate, is they're constantly trying to figure out, I've got these parameters, I'm trying to do a better job of this data coming through, predicting what's next, which I've never seen before. And so the only way to do that is to build better and better connections between all these different concepts and to form those somewhere. It's one of these things that if you had said this was how it was going to work 10 years ago, most people would have said that's impossible.
Yeah.
To really see it implemented and working, like that is something that is unprecedented.
So if you keep asking it the same question, might you get different answers?
You do. Because what these machines are trying to do is not give you one particular answer. They want to give you the whole range of possibilities, right? And that we could think of it as a distribution. Like at a technical level, we think of what these models do is they learn a probability distribution. And so it kind of learns over all possible answers, how likely is this to be like the correct answer to it? And it puts more probability mass on the answers that are better.
Would you say AI is the biggest disruptor of the status quo that we've ever seen?
I think it could be. I think that AI will be in many ways like the printing press, that it enables and unleashes creativity, productivity, expression in ways that are sometimes heretical, right? Sometimes unthinkable, sometimes very disruptive to how people have expected things to be, but no one would want to take away the printing press.
Yeah. Have you gotten much pushback though? The fact that it can be viewed as heretical?
I think that there is a moment right now where people are trying to decide and understand how AI fits in. Like, are they benefiting from AI? And to me, this is one of the most important things that we can do this year, is to really show people that AI is something that helps them, that they can build businesses, they can make money off of it. It's something that helps them in their personal life and sometimes financially, like helping them save money, helps with their health, helps with education. All of these things, I think, are the reason that you should have AI and want AI. And I think that that is one of our objectives, is for people to really feel it.
Tell me about your experience at MIT.
So I started at Harvard and
Undergraduate.
Undergraduate. And when I was choosing where to go, I wasn't into programming at the time. That I thought I was going to do mathematics, I thought I was going to do philosophy, I thought I would do maybe chemistry. And for these interests, that Harvard seemed like a pretty good place.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I got there, I was addicted to building and to building for other people. And so I just started being at the Computer Society, was working on some startups. And I remember that my first year at the Computer Society, there were these two seniors who would spend every meeting having an obscure technical debate. And the rest of us would listen in thinking like, one day that will be us. And then they graduated. And suddenly I was running the club and I was supposed to have the obscure technical debates. And I was like, I'm a sophomore. I'm not ready for this yet. I still want to learn.
Yeah.
And I kept looking down the street at MIT, where I knew a number of people who were far better at programming than I was, and that I knew I could learn from. And so I started spending all of my time there. And I realized I'm probably in the wrong place. So I transferred.
After how many years was this?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Yes. And it was a tough decision. It was very, very difficult.
Absolutely.
Like my college roommates started to maintain this weather report of how likely Greg was to transfer to MIT any given day. And so over the course of a month, it went from 99% to 1% to 50%. And in the end, I decided to do it.
Yeah.
And the reason I did, and looking back, I've realized that many of my life decisions are made by me dreaming of the upside, of thinking of, well, what if this really works, right? If it actually is as great as I think at MIT, I'd be able to learn all these things. And then thinking about, well, what is the downside? What's the worst case scenario? And maybe the worst case is I come back to Harvard. Harvard actually, when I went to tell them I was dropping out, they said, sounds like a leave of absence to me. Like they do not let you drop out of Harvard.
Yeah.
And so it felt like, okay, this is actually a great opportunity. I can try it and see what happens. And it wasn't as good as I hoped. It was even better, perhaps.
Wow.
Because I really got to spend that time just constantly in their computing club. I built all these different services, learned a lot. I interned at this startup that was built by people from that computing club. And from all of them, I just learned all these deep technical ideas. And there's this culture at MIT that is hard to describe, and I'll do my best. But it's like imagine a place that experienced computers and internet technologies 20 years before everyone else did. And then there's like a lot of little cultural decisions and ways that people talk and operate that fall from it. And even very minor things you wouldn't think about. For example, if you're sitting over someone's shoulder, doing something together and they have to type in their password, you look away, right? Just like little things like that you just notice culturally, this is how people do it. No one says it, it's just what you do. And there was a system called Zephyr, which was a chat system that the whole university was on. And this had existed, this is far before Facebook, right? This had existed for probably 2 decades, maybe more. And that often if you go into a room, you see a bunch of people out with their laptops, they all start laughing. You don't ask them what's so funny. You pull out your laptop, you go on Zephyr, right? So there was this kind of mixed like virtual and physical reality that people existed in. And I remember that the IT staff were deeply technical, that there was all sorts of funny things, like for example, that MIT, because they were so early on the internet, they actually own 1/256th of all of the IP addresses. And so then the rest of the world, you don't experience what it means to be IP rich, right? To have far more IPs than you could ever use. And so every single light had its own IP. So you could actually program every single light bulb, right? So like these little things that you could just do there that you couldn't do anywhere else.
Yeah.
I've never experienced quite such a hacker's playground as MIT.
That's great. It's great you had the opportunity to do it and you made the choice, because it does seem like a bold choice.
It was not an easy one at all. And it was one that...
But clearly the right one.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I remember talking to my parents, and no matter what you tell your parents you're going to go do, if it involves leaving Harvard, it's got to be tough on them.
Were they supportive?
I think that at the time, it was hard for them to understand. And they said that, but they said, it is your decision. You have more information than us.
Yeah.
Sitting where we're sitting, the idea of leaving Harvard, that seems like a tough pill, but we do trust you. And so in the end, I'd say that they were supportive, but they didn't make it easy.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, I think that having that forcing function to really think it through and really understand what it was I was signing up for is something I think helped me even get more out of the opportunity.
Yeah. Tell me about your parents.
So they are both doctors. My mom is a psychiatrist. My dad is an ophthalmologist. And I grew up in North Dakota. So North Dakota, many people have heard of Fargo because of the movie, the TV show.
Yep.
If you go an hour north, you get to a town called Grand Forks, which when I was growing up was about 60,000 people. If you then go 8 miles outside of that, approximately, you're at Thompson, which is a town of about 1,000 when I was growing up. And then you go about half mile outside of that, and you're at my house. So
would you say rural?
It was rural, yes.
And the 1,000-person town was your closest?
That's right, yes. And so I went to elementary school through 4th grade in Thompson. And I was lucky in that my parents worked in Grand Forks, and that we were eligible for open enrollment into the Grand Forks public schools. Because Thompson was very small, there weren't that many different opportunities academically.
Yeah.
And so for 5th grade onwards, I was in Grand Forks. And one of the big things that unlocked a lot of my future learning and development was in 6th grade, my dad taught me some algebra. And 7th grade is the first time that you have 2 tracks. You have the advanced math, pre-algebra in 7th grade, and then the normal 7th grade math. And my mom and I went to the math teacher ahead of the school year and said, hey, can he just skip into algebra? And the teacher looked at us with this most condescending look and was like, every parent believes that their child is special. I can guarantee you that your child will be plenty challenged in my class. A couple weeks later, I had been paying no attention, just playing calculator games in the back of the room. The teacher would try to trip me up and call on me and say, what's the answer? I'd look at the board and be like, 2x, and then go back to the games. And she was like, all right, there's nothing for me to teach your child. You should go into the algebra class. And so 7th grade, I was that 1 year advanced. But then 8th grade, no more math at my middle school. I didn't have a car, so I couldn't go to the high school. So instead, I did an online independent study. And in that year, I just got super into it. And I did 3 years worth of math in that 1 year. So I did geometry, pre-calc, algebra 2, all in that 1 year. And so next year, I'm at the high school, and I was in calculus. So I was this scrawny freshman, with the seniors. But I was cool, don't worry.
Yeah.
They were actually really nice. It was fun. And I also asked the school, hey, could I also just skip the 9th grade science and do chemistry? And they were accommodating. That was very nice of them. So I just really got to explore my own interests. And then 10th grade, I was considering, what do I do now? Or like I didn't have any more math in the high school. I did have a car now because it's North Dakota. You can get a car pretty early. And I had the University of North Dakota right there. And so I worked out a deal with my high school where I could take any classes I wanted at the university, as long as I was taking just 3 classes a semester at the high school. And that was my high school education.
Awesome.
It was amazing. I did research with a professor named Ryan Zier. He was fantastic. We got a published paper out of it. I studied a bunch of chemistry, did philosophy, just really got to explore and just take my academic interest in whatever direction I wanted.
That's amazing. So lucky that the school system was supportive of letting you do your thing.
That's right. And the interesting thing
Unusual.
It was a very unusual.
Yeah.
And if I was just slightly to the east in Minnesota, right? So we're right on the border with Minnesota. I would have had a very different experience because there they actually have a standardized program for how high schoolers go to college. And you wouldn't be able to take so many classes because it would be, if you're a junior, you get like 1 class or something like that. Senior, maybe you can have 2 classes. But this idea of like really just being embedded into university, because you have the standard system, it would have been impossible. And so there's something about this, because there was no program, but you have supportive educators, then I was able to really do it.
Yeah, that's a great argument against standardized systems in general.
Yes, because then you stop the exception. And for me, it's always been, like I remember in elementary school or so, we had to write like a little essay, as you would in 3rd grade, not the most sophisticated essay, but you know, the Frost poem of 2 paths in the woods. And the question that you're supposed to answer was, which of these paths would you take, the one that's trodden or not? And I was like, I wouldn't take either of them. I would blaze my own path through the woods. That seems way better.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much how I've lived my life.
I read that you were interested in acting when you were a kid.
That is true. So first of all, I was the male lead in my middle school play. So I was very good. Thank you. And the thing I really liked about acting, like I really loved improv because it's about seeing the connection between things.
Yeah.
And you have this interplay with another person or people, and you're just imagining, and you're really just constrained, not by reality in any way, but just by your wits and how quickly you can make things happen. And so I really enjoy humor. My wife would say that I enjoy making dumb jokes a lot. I appreciate that she puts up with it. And that for me, acting was an expression of this value of really feeling the imagination turning into reality while connecting across different concepts. And so I, in 9th grade, faced what I felt was a choice between going the more math science route or going the acting route, because I wanted to be great. I wanted to really dedicate myself to the craft. And I ended up going the math route, but I always kind of wondered. And my first paid job was actually an acting gig. So this was 9th grade. I was a small high schooler, and the Mannheim Steamroller was coming to Grand Forks, North Dakota for a concert. And we were told that they're looking for extras to act as tin soldiers for the show. And I was like, this sounds great. You get paid like $100 for the whole night. That'd be like the most money I could have imagined to make in one sitting. Like that'd be so great. And I show up, and it's all these college students. And I'm like, oh man, like I'm gonna be in trouble. Like clearly they're all that are typecast for this role. And so the way that they had the audition go was they had everyone stand at attention, walk in a direction, and then the casting people would all compare notes. And meanwhile, all the college kids would hang out with each other and talk. But I was like, there's one job, is to stand for the whole concert at attention. And so I spent the whole audition just standing at attention when everyone else was relaxing. And afterwards, they called up the people that they were selecting. I didn't get called. I was about to leave. They said, hey, no, actually, we thought you were just so amazing. You're just too small, so we can't give you that role. So we're going to create something new for you. And so they instead gave me the part of being a gingerbread man. And so I got the job. I got paid the $100. And it was really through that different audition approach.
Do you think that there's a relationship between improv and AI?
I do.
Like the yes and?
Yes. Yeah. I think that AI in many ways is the ultimate improv partner. And if you take away the post-training and you look at just the pre-trained model, that is its job. Its job is to say, I'm in this situation. I need to get oriented. Here's some text, here's some scenario, here's some images, here's some DNA sequence, whatever the input data is. And its job is just to figure out what comes next. And it's never seen this before. It's a total mystery. And it needs to orient itself and figure out what's a plausible thing and then do the right thing. And come on, like that's improv.
What was the first website that you built?
The first website I ever built that got users was this amazing experience. I had this idea to build what I call the reverse Turing test. So in the Turing test, to determine is a machine intelligent, you have a human who talks to another human and talks to an AI. And the goal is to figure out which of these is the human, which is the AI. So I built a website that turned this into a competitive game where you have both humans are talking to each other and they're each talking to an AI. They don't know which terminal is which. And the objective is to figure out which of your terminals is the other human before the other human does. And so the optimal strategy is to ask questions that kind of discern, am I talking to a human or a bot? But while still acting kind of bot-like. Because if you act too human-like, then you'll lose because the other person will figure out who you are.
Wow.
This was 2008. And I just taught myself how to code. I'd gone online to W3 Schools tutorials, did HTML, JavaScript, PHP, CSS. And I remember that I built this game, and it's a 2-player game. So I was sitting in the lobby. So in case anyone showed up, they'd have a good experience and have someone to play against.
Lobby where?
I made it so that there was like a game lobby just on my website.
I see.
And so I just sit there just waiting with this open screen, just sadly waiting for someone to show up. And for like 2 weeks, no one showed up. But then one day, it was the most glorious day. I got 1,500 hits from StumbleUpon.
Wow.
Yeah, if you remember StumbleUpon, it was like an early, it'd send people to random websites. And it was an amazing moment where that day, there were like always 3 or 4 games going constantly. I'd sit in the lobby and someone joined within a couple minutes. And I remember this feeling that this thing was in my head and now it's in reality. And now these people are all enjoying what I built and I want to keep chasing it.
Yeah. The more you played, would you get better at that game?
Yes. I got quite good at it. And it was interesting, actually. I focused a lot on improving the bot. My bot was like very rudimentary. And the way that it would work is I kept a database of all the previous games. And then I tried to, in any particular conversation, match that conversation to the most similar one and then reply with what the human had said then. And it actually kind of worked, right? For any sort of chit-chatty thing that kind of it's done already, then you have a pretty good database of replies. But anything more sophisticated, and of course, it just would fall on its face.
Can you remember at all where the idea came from for that game?
Well, the way that I got excited about AI was by reading Alan Turing's paper on the Turing test. So this is his 1950 paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. I was reading it shortly before building this game, and it had the most inspirational ideas in it. Because first he asked the question, can a machine ever be intelligent? And he says, look, I don't know what intelligence means. Everyone's going to have their own definition. So let's define a test. He defined the Turing test. But then he says, how will you ever program an answer to this test? You will never program it. It's just too hard to write down all the rules of this person says this and that. Instead, you will need to build a machine that can learn its own answer to this. You have to build a learning machine. So if you can build a machine that is a child machine that learns like a human child, and you can then have a human who gives it rewards and punishments as it does good things and bad things, then that's how you will solve this test. And here's the wild thing. That is exactly what we've been doing. This is like Alan Turing in 1950, projecting how we will first build these unsupervised models that learn, that sort of observe the world, have all this knowledge in them, and then we do this reinforcement learning process. We give the machine rewards and punishments in order to achieve the objective that you have in front of it. And I remember talking to my co-founder Ilya about this, and I was like, how did Turing know? And he said, there's a reason that Turing is Turing, right? That he is just so smart. And that's why, yeah, he really
Why do you think
had
it
this
took
vision.
so long from 1950 to now?
Very simple answer. It's compute. There just was not enough compute. It's like, no matter how smart Turing was, he did not have a computer that he could implement his test on.
Was there a feeling in the early days for you that AI was sort of a failed thing? The ideas have been around since the 50s and it hasn't really worked.
So this for me was always a great mystery. It was so clear the Turing test vision was so clear. It was like, that's the thing you need to do. Because as a programmer, I have to understand the solution to the problem. But the point that Turing makes is that you can have a machine that comes up with its own solution to the problem. And I was like, think of how many problems I have no idea how to solve. And maybe the machine could do it. That's what I want to do. I want to help that thing come into existence. And I remember after building this game, I showed up at college at Harvard, and this is still 2008. And I was very excited to do research with a natural language processing professor.
Were you studying math at Harvard?
I was going to study math, and I got computer science nerd tonight, but my number one thing was going to be math. I actually was originally intending to do math, chemistry, and philosophy triple major, but I ended up realizing that I just loved the practicality of building with computers. And so I went to this professor and I asked him if I could do research with him. He said, yes, no problem. And he gave me this parse trees problem. And I remember looking at the parse trees, I was like, this is never going to scale.
What is that? I don't know what that is.
Parse trees, they were like an old school NLP, like natural language processing approach. So the idea of like, imagine you take sentences and you figure out like where the object is and where the noun is, kind of like the things that people do in elementary school.
Like linguistics.
Yeah, like linguistics as an approach for how you're going to do natural language processing. And you can get some kind of simple looking stuff out of that because it'll make reasonable looking sentences, but that's never going to scale to having a conversation like this. It was just so clear to me. I was like, this is not what Turing was talking about. I'll go do things that are useful. And instead, I actually got into programming languages. So I was very excited about that. I took a class. I wanted to do more research there. And the thing about programming languages, you have all of this power of, like, a compiler is a computer program that takes a different program and makes it better in some way. So it usually takes it from a high level form and puts it into a form the machine can understand. Usually will optimize it so it's faster and really take the intent of a human and translate it into a form that the machine can then take care of some of the details. Because for me, that was the spirit, is I want a machine that can solve problems that I can't, that will empower me in ways that I am unable to reach, that will bring me to new heights. And not just for me, but for everyone. And so I would do that. I got very into the Harvard Computer Society, where we would build services for the Harvard community. So we would host email and web hosting and other technical services. We built different web applications for the community. And so this was very much the ethos that I had. And it really wasn't until I was already at Stripe, where I was doing a startup and building things, but paying attention to the community. And I just kept seeing people talking about deep learning. It felt like every day, if you went on Hacker News, which was this website that many engineers would post content on, you'd see something about deep learning for X. And I remember wondering, what is deep learning? And at the time, it was basically impossible to figure out, because you go to deeplearning.com or .org or whatever it was, and it just said deep learning is a new approach to AI.
But it didn't say what it was.
It didn't say what it was.
Yeah.
It made no sense. But I remember that I had a friend in the field, and so I went and talked to that person, and he started introducing me to other people in the field. And I just kept getting introduced to all my smartest friends from college, because they were all in the field now.
How many people were in the field at that time in the world?
It was a small community, very small community. I don't know the overall number, 1,000 at most. And it was rapidly growing, because the thing that I learned is that there was this moment in 2012 that really unleashed the current deep learning revolution. And in many ways, everything had been building up to that moment, but this was the moment that really cemented there's something real here for many people. And this was the creation of AlexNet, which was a image recognition paper that competed on this benchmark.
Explain what that is.
So the idea is that in, I think, 2006, 2008, a lab at Stanford created a competition where they gathered millions of high-resolution images from across the web. At this point, we would consider a small data set. At the time, it was massive and unprecedented. And it categorized these images into 1,000 different categories, so that humans that would label them and say, this is a specific type of cat, and this is a specific type of bird, and this is a specific type of airplane. So 1,000 different categories of images. And the goal was create a machine, create a program that can categorize a new image into one of these 1,000 buckets. So can you recognize whether there's a cat or dog in an image? And that people would compete in this, and they would compete hard, and they would take all of these 40 years worth of computer vision research ideas, very similar to like the feeling of those parse trees, right? You would have these different techniques that would do like edge detection and things like that are like very specific. And if you think about what are the rules for recognizing a cat, it's like, well, maybe you look for a eye and another eye, but how do you recognize if there's an eye, and maybe look if there's a nose, and then, but okay, the orientation could make it very complicated to actually program
relationships.
Exactly. So you have to talk about these relationships, and it's very hierarchical. If you think about the process of, you have to see how all these different pieces fit together and then how those pieces relate to other pieces, very complicated. And so people were not getting very good results here. It felt like a total impossible
And really,
challenge.
it's a study of the real world. It wasn't really technical. It was observational.
Yes. Because the thing that people would do is that they would say, how do I think humans do this? Or what's the process I have in my head? Or let's write down some symbolic way to tell the machine how to pursue a process. And this was very successful in some domains, right? For example, chess is one that in the 90s that we built great machines to solve it, but very unsuccessful in other domains like computer vision.
There's only one page of rules
Exactly.
for the game of chess.
Simple rules and a small search space. So you could have a computer that would basically just say, you know what, I'm gonna look through all the possibilities and that is how I will win. Which, by the way, was not enough for Go, right? Go, simple rules, but massive search space. And so you needed something more like human intuition on top of the search. And for computer vision, you needed something that was entirely like intuition. And so that's where the neural nets came into play. And so a team of researchers who were Jeffrey Hinton, Ilya Sutskever, Alex Krzyzewski, created a neural net that won this competition. And it didn't just slightly win it, it just blew everything else out of the water, like a massive jump.
Did they have a different vision of it than everyone else?
Their approach was neural nets. No one else believed in it.
I see.
And it's actually very funny, the inside story on how that result came to be. Because Alex Krzyzewski was a grad student in Jeff Hinton's lab, and he was working on very fast convolutional kernels for GPUs. So he basically was programming graphics processing units, GPUs, which now are what people use for deep learning. And everyone felt bad for him. It was like, that's just an engineering project. He's just writing these very fast kernels. Who cares? Like, we're off doing all this cool research. He's just an engineer. That's not valuable. And he had some cool results on like this small image recognition data set, and people didn't really care. But Ilya saw that, and he instantly knew what to do with these kernels, right? That he realized this is a breakthrough in the making. Because when ImageNet had come out, this big data set, he had felt like this was this grand challenge that was just so impossible. If you could solve it, it'd be so great, but you just need to be able to put enough compute into it. And he sees these kernels that were going to use the computer, the GPU, very efficiently. And he said, we need to put these two things together. Don't apply it to this other data set that you're using. ImageNet is the thing. And then Jeff Hinton's contribution was a management trick, because Alex Krzyzewski really hated writing papers. He had a review paper coming up, and Jeff told him, each week that you get a 1% improvement on the data set, I will push back the deadline on your review paper by 1 week. And he did this like a dozen times, 2 dozen times in a row.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of these things where it's just like Alex just kept grinding at the problem, and the numbers got better and better. And so you see the way that progress in this field happens is you need the right theory, you need the right objective, the right sort of underlying approach. You need the right engineering, right? You need to really implement it. You need to push hard on the problem, and you need to not give up even when it feels impossible. And you need the right spirit, right? You need to know that like it's worthwhile, and you need to have that desire to keep going even in the face of everything else. And so I think those three things together were what unlocked this particular result in this particular moment. And they submitted to the competition. Everyone in the computer vision field was like, what just happened, right? That this impossible problem has basically now been solved.
What was the reaction to that?
It was one of these things where within the computer vision community, it was seismic, right? I think people very quickly went from saying neural nets are a total dead end, like you're kind of a fraud if you're doing neural nets, to only neural nets.
But there was a time when you were a fraud if you were doing neural nets.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Until the breakthrough.
That's right.
Yeah.
And actually the history here is also very fascinating. So there's this paper you can find on Wikipedia somewhere from 1995 that talks about the history of the deep learning booms and busts. So it's really before all the current waves. And if you read it, that the things they're saying in there are the exact same things people would say to us throughout the whole history of OpenAI. These neural net people, in 1965, they would say these neural net people have no new ideas. They just want to build bigger computers. And so it makes you realize that history is written by the victors, that there was a very concerted campaign waged against this whole direction, saying symbolic systems, yes, neural nets, no. And that the neural net people knew what they wanted to do. They wanted bigger computers, deeper neural nets. And that the symbolic systems people got in very cozy with funding agencies and really just poisoned the well and said this whole thing is kind of BS. And so that's what killed it for the 70s, was that they claimed that it overhyped, there are all these groups working on it, that there's no results, and that to put the nail in the coffin, that there was this result that showed that a single layer of neural net couldn't solve a particular problem. So therefore the whole thing's dead. And of course the neural net people were like, but just let us go to not single layer, like we know what to do. But it was all like one of these things where the establishment killed it. The sort of centralized elite said no. And then the crazy thing is in the 80s, what this paper says is the reason neural nets came back was because of the democratization of compute, right? It went from being that you have these professors who guard all the compute to suddenly all these PhD students have their own computer. And so professor can't tell them they're not allowed to do neural nets. And so suddenly people are doing it again. And so to me, it's so interesting that this theme is universal. It's like always been true. It's not a new thing over the past 10 years. It's something that's been there for 60, 70 years.
So what happened after the adoption?
Well, so after the AlexNet result, that people outside the field of computer vision would still poo-poo it. They would say, well, oh, it works for computer vision, but neural nets have nothing to do with machine translation, right? Because you have these fixed size images and stuff like that. And for machine translation, you have these variable windows and things like that. 2014, you have sequence to sequence. Didn't get the same massive step function you did with AlexNet, but you could just see, yeah, you're going to push that, and this is going to be the only thing you need. And what happened is you effectively had the walls between departments being torn down. And it's this beautiful unification of, you thought that you had all these different domains of computer vision, machine translation, speech recognition, and it's nope, you just have AI. You just have deep learning.
It sounds like any time that the fringe groups
Yes.
can come together, something much more interesting can happen.
Yes. Are you familiar with, I think it's Arthur C. Clarke's first law?
No.
It's, if an elderly but distinguished scientist tells you that something is possible, they're almost certainly right. But if an elderly but distinguished scientist tells you that something is impossible, they're almost certainly wrong.
That's great. I love that. OpenAI started in your living room in San Francisco. Describe the living room to me.
It was a big open space, and we had a black wood table that was this big oval shape, had some couches, I had a big screen TV. Day one, there was no whiteboard. And I remember two researchers were debating something. They turned to write something on the whiteboard. There wasn't one. And I was like, I could get a whiteboard. And so I felt like I was adding value from day one.
Yeah. So who was in the room that first day?
In the room that first day would have been Sam Altman, Ilya Sutskever, Wojciech Zaremba was there. I think Vicky Chung, Pam Vegata, John Schulman, Andre Karpathy probably would have been there at the time. Some of them were finishing up their work elsewhere, their PhDs. I apologize if I'm forgetting anyone else, but that was, the founding team, the founding vibe was, we had this great objective of, we really wanted to help build AGI and have it be something that is a positive force for humanity. And we did not have a thesis on how we would do it. And so that was where we started.
And at what stage of the AI revolution were we when you were in that room? What was known, what was not known?
So this was the very beginning of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
At this time,
It's not so long ago.
Not so long ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years. Time flies.
Yes.
That's wild. And time, it compresses in this field.
Yes.
It's crazy. We had gone through, at that point, 4 years of this deep learning revolution. And so one thing that was clear was that it was like, there was this early phase where the fruit was just hanging on the ground, because you could just take a GPU, take a neural net, you point it at a new problem, and it's gonna work, and it's gonna get you awesome results. And so new architectures, it was kind of the heyday of basic research in a lot of ways. So individual researchers being able to come up with a novel idea, in a few months, prove it out, get an awesome paper, it would be an unprecedented thing that would kind of like define a field. So that was the moment that we were in. It wasn't yet the moment of grand engineering. It wasn't yet the moment of large scale compute, because you wanted as much compute as you could get, but you couldn't really get more
out of more GPUs, right? It really was that you had one GPU and orchestrating many of them together. We didn't have good techniques for how to actually get good returns from that. And I remember in the very early days working on the first engineering projects to support the researchers. And I observed two researchers building with two engineers. And the way that it would go is that researchers would say, here's the system I want, here are my requirements. And then the engineers would go off and build something and come back a few days later, and they would project it up on my TV. And then they would go line by line, spend a whole afternoon just debating every single line. I remember looking at that and thinking, this is never going to end. It's so slow.
Takes too long.
Too long. Not going to work. So instead, I ended up working on the project, and I would work in a very tight loop with the researcher. And I would say, here are 5 ideas. He would say, these 4 are bad. And I'd say, great, that's exactly what I wanted. And so just really this, not trying to push my own ideas, but really trying to learn the other person's perspective, the other person's view on the world, and try to then say, okay, I could translate it in all these different ways, and to try to just tease out what truth is, what reality is.
Typically, are the researchers engineers as well, or no?
In this field, they are much closer to engineers. And there are some people who are really at that intersection. For example, Jakub Pachoki, who's our chief scientist, one of the things that has really distinguished him is that he really has his foot in both worlds, that he has deep theoretical understanding. He has a PhD in optimization, but he also really knows how to build systems and has done it many times. And so that, it's a unique skill set. It's very valuable. And so the thing that I found was that for engineers to add value in this field, you have a pretty high bar, because these researchers, they all know how to code. They can build their own things. So you have to do better than they would on their own. And that's a contrast to if you're just building for doctors, say, right? Most doctors probably don't know how to code. So the bar to do better at building something for them than they could build on their own is relaxed. And so that a lot of what we focused on is how do you make sure you're empowering and moving forward the researchers?
How well did the handful of people in the room that day know each other?
So there was a subset of people who they'd all gone through PhD programs together. Some of them had interned together. So there was a set of people who knew each other, and there was a set of people who were newer to each other. But at this point, we'd actually already gone through some formative events. So we had really throughout the back half of 2015, I'd been doing all the recruiting to find just who are the best people in the field.
Was the first meeting the meeting of OpenAI, or was it a get-together that turned into OpenAI?
I'd say that the very first moment that was really the get-together that set things in motion was a dinner in July of 2015. And that was with Sam, that was with Ilya, that was with Elon, that was with a handful of others. And the question there is it too late to start a lab that can actually really get to AGI, right?
Why would it be too late?
Well, it felt like DeepMind kind of had it, right? That DeepMind had all the talent that they had as part of Google, all the compute, that it felt like maybe AGI was very close. And can you actually get together a group of great people and really go for this?
Did you start it in competition with Google, would you say?
I don't think of it as competition, but I do think of it as complementary, right? That I think that my view on how AI should go, and this is very foundational, is that I think that AI is something that everyone deserves to participate in. And to me, it felt like we're going to build these incredibly powerful systems, and that how they play out for humanity to uplift everyone is something that is the single most important thing that can happen, and contributing to that and helping steer that in a direction that makes sure it actually is beneficial to everyone. Like, that's the thing that I want to do. And so to me, it felt like it's not about the back and forth on who has the best benchmark.
Yeah.
It's really on how do we build systems and overall society that integrates with those systems, right? That these things are going to co-evolve together. That is a much better world than the one that we have today. And that isn't something that any one group can do on their own.
How big of a revolution did you know it was then? Could you see where we are now then, or no?
Then it felt like if it was going to work at all, it'd kind of have to feel like this.
Yeah.
And I think we're not done.
Describe the personalities and strengths and weaknesses of every person in the room.
Well, I'd say that Sam, I think, is a visionary. And I think that Sam is someone who gives permission to dream big ideas. And I think he also cares a lot. I think he cares a lot about people. And I think that he is someone who is like always very optimistic about how we can find a way to configure any solution to a problem. And so I think that he is someone where you feel like, hey, this is never going to work. He will find a solution, but he is always someone.
It opens your mind that it can be solved.
That's right. That's
and
right.
That maybe it's not the best solution yet.
That's right.
But once you know it can be solved, then you can work on a better one.
That's right. And it's not detached from reality, right? It's like kind of connected to, like, I think he's like an excellent sort of facilitator for researchers and for this overall sort of shepherding of this technology into the world. Ilya, again, I think is a visionary. I think he is someone who, I remember in that very first couple of days, he said, I have this idea I've been thinking about for how we can solve what was called unsupervised learning, how we can observe the world.
What is that?
So if you think about how a human baby learns, just by observing the world, right? There's no one saying this is the right thing.
No one's doing input.
Exactly. It just happens.
It just happens.
And this was always, to me, this always felt like a crazy concept of how can the machine ever learn without someone telling it whether it's doing a good job or not.
Yeah.
But we figured it out. I remember that he had a lot of ideas on how to really push it into machine.
Even in that room, would there be people who think that's too far?
So in that room, we immediately started trying to write down ideas, and that the energy was just palpable. One of the steps along the way to everyone coming to that room was this offsite in November of 2015. So I mapped out the whole field, or all the best people, and kind of been asking people for who do you know who's great, and then they would introduce me to people. And so I just kind of kept track of, I kept getting introduced to this guy called Wojciech. I was like, all right, Wojciech's probably someone I should go after.
Yeah.
And we had narrowed down to a set of people, but they were all kind of like, okay, well, who else is joining? Like, I'm interested, but who else is in? And you're like, how do I collapse this? And I asked Sam what to do, and he suggested to bring everyone to an offsite. And at this point, actually, I remember I was very grateful to John Schulman, who had said that he would be in. So I was at least not the only one who had committed. And I think maybe there was one or two others who were kind of there, but it really was a group of people who had not yet coalesced into a team.
Yeah.
And we brought everyone out. We were in my apartment. We got into the bus. We drive up to Napa. And it was just this day where everyone clicked, right? That the energy was just so smooth, right? It's that flow state in human form. And I remember that we wrote up on this flip chart, and I have a picture of this flip chart, the plan. There's a 3-step plan. Step 1 was solve RL, which is reinforcement learning, that is learning from these rewards and punishments. 2 is solve UL, that is unsupervised learning, that is observe the world and just absorb the information. And then 3 is gradually learn more complicated, in quotes, things. And this actually is what we've been doing for a decade. It's actually crazy, right? It's like we really set out the vision. And so
it's very tight to the original vision. It's just the growth of the original vision.
It is. It really is. When I look at everything we have done, it has been in service of the same goal with really the same almost technical approach and the same ethos underlying it.
Any of the other people in the room who had particular either expertise or views or that were different than the others that are worth describing?
Yeah, I'd say Wojciech, and I still work very closely with him, is also a unique character. He is extremely good at idea generation, and he will come up with very creative ideas to any problem. And then he is also someone who is not at all attached to his own ideas, right? Because if you're someone who's going to take offense, then it's really hard to be that generative.
Well, if you want it to be as good as it can be, they can't all be your ideas.
That's right. What I usually do when working with him is really think about, okay, well, what are the bounds on what we should think about, right? Here are the places that we don't want to go, or here's kind of the place that we need to end up. And then the idea generation process just ends up with this great flywheel.
How did you end up at Stripe?
So while I was at MIT, I was building more, and I did more startups, and from each one I felt like I learned another thing not to do. And eventually I kind of felt like I knew enough that I could be successful at doing a startup, but I was missing a key component, which is having an idea.
Yeah.
And I was pattern matching off of my friends who had been in the computer club, started their own startup. They had gone to a master's program, come up with a cool idea there. I was like, well, clearly that's what you need to do. You need to go to grad school.
You saw the path.
Yes, but the path that I saw was actually too much of the beaten path, right? The beaten path is in your PhD program, you invent something there and you turn that technology into a startup. And I remember just feeling like, okay, I'm 21. I'm just too young to do real things in the world. This path is the only thing that's possible. but at the very least I can start meeting people doing startups, because I had taken a startup class and it was just not useful. I was like, all right, like this is not going to get me to where I want to go.
Yeah.
And so I decided I'd meet these people doing startups. And literally the next day I got an email from some people working on a payment startup in Palo Alto. I was like, well, my new thing is to meet these people and learn to pattern match over time. And I remember when I met Patrick, we just clicked.
What was his background?
Well, so he had been at MIT. And so he and his brother.
Did you know him from MIT?
No, I did not. Yeah, but we had mutual friends, because he had gone to MIT, John had gone to Harvard. So it was that community that they were asking around.
Yeah.
And my name, of course, came up in both circles. And I remember I flew out and it was like raining and kind of miserable. And I remember opening the door and just like when we first started talking, it was just an instant connection, right? I think we just like had this, different backgrounds in many ways, right? But also we had a very similar technical perspective, and like even for very nerdy things, I mean, we had the same like split keyboard that we use, this Kinesis keyboard. Yeah. We both were Dvorak, the actual layout that we used was different. And we were talking about how to like build the firewalls for the systems that they had. And we were talking about, different things in the kernel. And so it was just like, we had this like technical connection.
Yeah.
And I think that what I also really appreciated about Patrick and John is that they were my age and they were already out there doing things, right? That they were already doing a startup. And I was like, I don't think that's possible. One of the two of us is wrong. I really want to know who it is.
Yeah. And then what happened?
So weekend was great. They said, you should join. I said, let me go think about it. I went back to school. John happened to be in town on Thursday. And so I was like, I probably should make my decision. And I was like, you know what, I want to do this. Because again, back to that algorithm of dream of the what if this works. I'm like, I don't know anything about payments. Like this is not the problem that I've grown up passionate about. But these people.
But you get to solve a real problem.
Yeah, solve a real problem. Exactly. And these are the people that I feel like I can learn from or that I can work with. And I remember John was like, will you do it? I was like, all right, fine, I'll do it. And I just remember feeling like, okay, like that
they want
there's
me.
Someone, exactly, they want me.
It's a good feeling.
It was a really good feeling.
Yeah.
And so I decided that on Thursday. Friday, I spent telling my teachers that I was out.
How did that go?
It was a little tough.
Was it emotional for you?
It was definitely, it felt like the end of something.
Yeah.
And, Harvard, when I told them I was leaving, they said,
You're coming back.
You're coming back.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's probably for their numbers and, that kind of thing. But it definitely felt like, okay, I see how this goes. MIT was a little bit more like, okay, like talking to the relevant person that they said that, if you have to check in every 6 months or so, because if it too long goes by, then, maybe you'll have to reapply and we're not really sure. And it just was a very different vibe. And I remember talking to the professors were supportive. And I think this is the thing that they see. But they were also, I think a little sad to see me go like mid-semester. Yeah, I really appreciated the mentorship they provided. Like I was in the middle of the operating systems course, which is this famous course at MIT taught by these like extremely good professors. And it was just such a cool class. And I was very sad to not get to implement further projects. And so it was definitely like kind of giving up on some sort of exposure to an experience. And it was also hard to say goodbye to the people, right? There were all these people that I'd gone there to learn from and work with. And the funny thing is many of them ended up coming out to the Valley, got to work with them at Stripe, got to spend a bunch of time with them in other ways. So it was much less of a goodbye than I thought it was at the time.
Yeah. Growing up where you grew up and moving as quickly as you did you feel different?
I definitely felt different, yes.
Was it lonely? Did you feel like an outsider?
Like I definitely felt different. I definitely didn't fit in, right? And there was like a lot of things that other kids were into that I just didn't understand. Like I remember being on the school bus in kindergarten and other kids were like singing along to the radio and I didn't know any of the words.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I don't even know how to bridge this gap. And so I had a number of moments like that where I just felt like there's just something about me that like doesn't quite match. And some of it was about activities, like a lot of the kids would hunt and that was not something that my family did at all. And so there's just something very different. I did play hockey for a little bit. I was not very good, but I was goalie. So I started to try to, do some activities that would match. But I remember I was one thing I really cared about was carving an identity for myself. Because if you're different and you don't really feel like you have an identity, then it's lonely. But if you're different and you have an identity, something that defines you,
Yes.
then you're charting your own path. And for me, it was being the smart kid. Like I remember in elementary school that we had a weekly spelling quiz. And the way it would work is on Monday, the teacher would give you the 10 or 20 words for the week. And then at the end of the week, you'd be tested on them. And you'd kind of have this pre-test on Monday where you'd have to write them down as the teacher says them. And if you got it wrong, you'd have to go ask one of the other kids who got it right how to spell it. And normally I'd get them all right. But I remember one week, I got one of the words wrong. And I remember another one of the smart kids in the class, he got it right. And I was so ashamed that I would have to go and ask him for the right answer, because that would be just eroding this core identity that I had.
Wow. That sounds like it was really healthy, though, that you got to do that, and it set you up to not have to have all the answers.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was not necessarily a bad thing that happened.
It was a good story.
That's right.
So then when you got to meet someone like Patrick, was it a feeling of, oh, he's like me?
Yes.
Must have been a great feeling.
It really was. It really was. And he had done a startup before. So he and John had previously.
And he was 21 and he had already done a startup.
Exactly. Yes.
How did that happen?
So they did a startup called, oh man, I haven't thought about this for a while. I'm not gonna remember all the details, but I think, okay, so Patrick and John grew up in Ireland, and I think that Patrick had met Paul Graham, who runs Y Combinator, this startup incubator, through the Lisp community. So through the programming language that they were very into. And I think that was his connection to then doing YC, doing a startup. That startup got sold to a company called Live Current Media. They worked for the acquirer for some time, but clearly that was not the thing that they wanted to do with their lives.
How early were you in Stripe?
So early days of Stripe, there were 4 of us. There was John, there was Patrick, there was Dara Buckley, and there was me. And when I first was there was some infrastructure and there was a payment processor. It also wasn't clear exactly how we were going to proceed, because there was one idea was, well, what if we build some apps and then use this payment processing we're building to power those apps? And so that's how you actually build something. And eventually the payment processor will probably be the thing, but these apps could be too. And so there was a time tracking thing that Patrick had been working on that was one of the potential ideas. So it's still in this nascent form, but still something that we could see like the direction of travel. And the funny thing, by the way, is that I mentioned that I did this startup class in MIT, and that as part of that, you're supposed to build like a mock startup. And the one that I ended up building was a payment processor. And so I spent all this time trying to figure out, how do you do payment processing online? And realizing it's horrible, it's painful. It's like trying to go to PayPal and trying to like read their documentation, trying to figure out how to sign up for something. It was just so opaque, and you just realize, how can it possibly be so bad?
Yeah.
And that was the fundamental unlock for Stripe, was this realization that you can do payments processing better. And I remember that the initial website said, payment processing doesn't need to suck. Right. And it was just like that is the ethos of just like, it just doesn't need to, it can be better.
Yeah.
And I really like that spirit. I remember talking to a VC at some point, this was pre-launch, but we had gotten a lot of buzz, and he was saying, okay, what is your secret sauce? And I was like, well, we just do it better. And he's like, no, come on. I know that's what you say to everyone, but like, what's the actual secret sauce? And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that is what we do, is just focus on every single detail and get it right.
So it really wasn't creating something new. It was already PayPal. It was just a much better PayPal.
Exactly.
Is that right?
It was. And it was really focusing on the details of the whole experience end to end, right? And really thinking about, just because if you've gone through it yourself and you realize like this part, like how do you sign up for an account? How do you actually even connect to the APIs, to the actual way the computers talk to each other? What are the different parameters you program against? How do you figure out which programming language to use or which wrapper to use? All these things. Each one of those can add a ton of friction. And so if you just focus on, okay, I'm gonna make this one good, this one good, this one good, make it good for myself, make it good for my friends.
Yes.
Actually, this will be something that makes it good for everyone.
And why did you leave Stripe?
Well, I had been at Stripe for almost 5 years, 4.5 years. And about 4 years in, I think I started to consider whether or not this was what I wanted to do for the long term. And the way that I kind of view things is like, okay, if you think of your career in 5-year chunks, and 5 years is about the right length, because less than that is kind of hard to do something significant. And I remember feeling like, okay, I'd gotten this company to a place where it was going to succeed with or without me.
Yeah.
And then the question was, do I continue or do I go and do something new? And I was very excited about doing the idea of a startup. But I remember talking to Patrick, and I think he had some very convincing reasons to stay. That one point he made is that it's very hard to assemble a group of people that can do significant things in the world. And best case scenario, you go start some startup and have some success with it. And then 5 years later, you'll have formed that group of people that can do stuff, but you already have it here.
Yeah.
Right? We already had this tight group that was able to accomplish things. And so why walk away from that? So it was very tough. It was not easy. I remember I cried when I told Patrick that I was out. Like, yeah, it was very, very tough. He and John threw a juice party for me. It was a very, very nice send off. And the reason that I decided, I remember feeling like, as I thought that through, I was like, well, if it really is so hard to build that group of people who can accomplish significant things, I got to get started now.
Yeah. It sounds like you left because the mission of Stripe wasn't the mission that you wanted to focus on.
That is true. Yeah, it's a beautiful mission and it's the one I very much support, but it's different to say, is this one where I will just need to pursue it in any form?
And did you leave knowing what was going to be next, or did you leave thinking, I'm going to figure it out?
More the latter. I had a list of 3 different areas I might focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 was AI. Number 2 was VR/AR. Number 3 was programming education. And for me, it was very clear, if I can contribute to AI in some way, okay, I'm doing that. But it wasn't clear to me, do I have the skills, is it the time, all those things? And so the other 2 were kind of backup options.
I understand there was a point in time that you wrote a chemistry textbook.
That is true.
When was that?
That was also 2008. So after high school, I took a year off. And I had spent much of my high school doing academic, both college courses, but also competitions. I got very into math competitions, got very into chemistry competitions. And I remember 10th grade, because I'd taken chemistry in 9th grade, I took some chemistry competition that my mom had found online and just kind of did it on the lark. And I got best in my region. I was like, okay, that's cool. My state didn't really have it, so I was in Minnesota to do it. I took the statewide one and I got best in the state. And they invited me to the training camp for the International Chemistry Olympiad. So it's top 20 kids in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And for this, they send you some textbooks ahead of time. They say, please read chapters 1 through 8 of this organic chemistry textbook. These are the textbooks we're going to use for the camp. And so I read through chapters 1 through 8. Didn't take it that seriously. I was like, look, I am just destined to succeed. Like, it's just going to work. Like, it happened so far. And I remember I showed up at the chemistry competition or the chemistry camp, and the other kids had read not just those first 8 chapters. They'd read all the books. They'd read not just the whole one book, but all of these big fat, like physical chemistry, all these other ones. And I was just like, wait, what? You can do that? These other people are doing that? And I remember just feeling so demoralized and crushed for the 2 weeks of the training, because it was just like these people knew all these things that I didn't know. And we were supposed to be studying for the final exam. I was playing cell phone games in my room. I just gave up. I was like, there's just no hope.
Yeah.
And so they announced the top 4 to go to the international. They said, these 4 people, they weren't me.
Yeah.
They announced 2 runners up. They announced those 2. It wasn't me. I was like, I'm obviously 20. Fortunately, they don't tell you the ranking of the rest. I was like, so bad. And I remember at the beginning of the next school year, looking back at how I'd spent that summer. And I felt like I had this amazing opportunity in front of me and I'd squandered it. And it was a horrible feeling. It was this feeling that I had just coasted, that I just sort of believed that talent alone would just get me to where I wanted to go. I didn't have to work hard. And I was like, I never want to feel that again. And so I took it seriously that year. I started taking physical chemistry. I took organic chemistry. I took all these things. I spent a lot of time on looking at old chemistry competitions and learning them and looking through a bunch of different material in order to become a real competitor. And that year I made the team of the top 4, went to the International Chemistry Olympiad, got a silver medal. It was very, very awesome experience. I really enjoyed it. But for me, the big takeaway was this feeling of you always have to work hard.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes is the cycling quote. It never gets easier. You just go faster. And I think that is something I very much live by.
So how did you end up writing the book?
Well, I felt like I'd come up with a very unique way of looking at chemistry. a very mathematical first principles approach to it. Because if you read most chemistry textbooks, it just says, well, basically memorize these reactions, here are these chemical properties, here's these compounds. But you always ask why. Like, why is it that way? Does it have to be that these atoms interact in this way? Or does this compound have to be this color? Like, how do you derive it from first principles? And so the approach that I'd taken in order to be good at the competitions was to really try to figure out the underlying rules, not the
Which wasn't in the textbook that you read.
It's not in the textbook. You have to distill it down yourself, right? And maybe they try to communicate it in some way, but it's like, it's just not the thing that they spend their time on. And so I structured the book. I felt like I had a different way of teaching chemistry, and I structured it in a way that was inspired by some of my friends who had done something similar in math, in this math form called the art of problem solving, where it's a very Socratic method. So the book has just questions, but they're intentionally scoped so that each one builds up. And so the first one starts from knowledge you should have. If you just think a little bit, you're like, oh, I can see how this works. And the next one builds on the previous thing. The next one builds on the previous thing. In the case of chemistry, you need some experimental results. So you say, like, here's this double slit experiment. And then you're like, okay, well, what does it mean for particle versus wave? And then, okay, if it means it's both a particle and a wave, then, you know, and so forth. And this was something that I really wanted to communicate to others. I really cared about not just this approach living in my head, but other people being able to benefit from it. Now, I never finished. I made it through about 100 pages. You can find it on my website if you're interested. But I felt like that ethos was something I really wanted to carry forward.
You basically wrote the book that you wish you could have read.
That's exactly right.
That's great.
Yes.
How is coding similar or different to other activities?
So the way that I think about coding is that you deeply understand some process. You write it down in a very obscure way we call a program, and then anyone can get the benefit of that thinking, right? People don't need to write the code. They don't need to understand the sort of mechanics of what went into it. And I think that there are other very cerebral domains that are like this, like mathematics, right? Where you think hard about a problem, you write it down in an obscure way we call proof, but no one reads those, right? Only like the 5 mathematicians who care about a particular domain will really deeply read it. And so I think that what makes coding stand apart to me is it's almost like magic. You sort of have this vision in your head, and you just, by describing it, somehow it comes to be. And so in some ways it's like management, right? That you have a computer that is there to perform the function that you have in mind, the vision that you have, and that it carries it out in a very literal fashion when you write a program. And I think that that to me is something I've never seen in really any other traditional domain. Like, it feels like many other things that you might do that you just don't get that same leverage, right? If you have this vision and somehow it comes into reality, and that you don't have to physically move things in the world, it just comes to be.
Would you describe it more like a language or more like math?
I would describe it more like math. But the thing about math that I think there's a misconception for is that math is not 1 + 1, right? It's not about these like mechanical calculations. Math is about the underlying structures of the universe, right? It's about understanding how different objects, different ideas relate to each other in this deep conceptual way, and the sort of symmetries and the relationships between objects look very, very different. And I think that programming is like that. It's really about understanding how should a website work, or what does someone want, and what are all the different ways that something in a corner case should behave. If there's an error, how should you handle it? All of these things, they feel somewhat mundane, but if you really look at the underlying architecture, you're thinking about, you have all these systems that are talking to each other, you have data stored in these different forms, you have ideas like encryption that are brought to play, and how do you orchestrate all of that in a way that delivers something useful? And so to me, I think it's about the beauty of mathematics that's reified into useful form.
Is math an overlay on nature, or is nature an overlay on math?
That's a great question. I think math is the fabric of the universe in many ways. Like, the thing I love about math is that it is the set of rules that are true in any reality. Like, I remember in middle school or high school starting to learn biology, and you learn all of these details about how different cell types work and all these different processes about chlorophyll and photosynthesis. But I remember feeling like, okay, this is something that happens to be true right here for this specific organism or way of studying things, but is this universally true? Like, does this have to be true always? Does this have to be how things work? And the thing that I love about math is that it is purely decoupled from observation. It is the set of things that must be true. And so I think for me, math is this deep, immutable understanding of what is even possible. And then nature is an instantiation in a specific form.
You think it was possible for nature to exist before the understanding of math, or was math needed for nature to exist?
I'm of two minds at this one, because to me, math feels like it exists independent of everything else. It's really a first principles, deep truth that doesn't matter what perspective you take. Like if we were to meet an alien from, hundreds of light years away, they would have the same mathematics. We would probably have something in common in that way, and maybe nothing else in common. But at the same time, I also feel like there's a question I struggle with sometimes of, do we discover mathematics or do we invent it? Is it a deep truth or is it our perspective on it that makes it come into reality? And I think that a naive view is to say, well, it's already there without us. But in some ways, if there's no one there to appreciate it, it's a little bit like the tree that falls in the forest with no one to hear, right? Is the sound there? And so I think that there is something about nature and the fact that we are here and that we are observers, that we are thinking beings, that causes math to have meaning rather than just be an abstraction with no significance.
If you were to explain what the coding process feels like to someone who doesn't code, how do you describe what it feels like you're doing?
So the most beautiful part of the coding process is when you're in flow state. And there, everything just kind of clicks. You have some objective. Perhaps it's something simple, like you want to change the color of a button. Perhaps it's something complex, like you want to build a database or a big distributed system with many computers talking to each other. But you have some objective in your mind that you want to see in reality. And you have a partial implementation. Maybe you're starting from a blank slate. Maybe you have written some code and it sort of works, or it implements a subset of what you're looking for. And then you try it, you test it out, and you see that there's a gap between what you have in your head and what you observed in the system. And sometimes it's a subtle gap, which usually you think of as a bug. You wrote the code, it was supposed to do something, it did something different. And then in that case, you start to form a mental model of, well, I know how the code is written. I see this observation that's different from what's expected, or perhaps was expected, but is not yet what I have in my mind. And you think about what's the gap? Maybe you know immediately, oh, there's this specific line, I probably messed it up. This value is too high, I should go back and check. Maybe it's, you don't quite know, so you think about, well, what would give me more information to figure out where it comes from? And so often adding what we call telemetry, so adding observability so that you can get numbers out from the middle of the code about how fast different parts are running. You can get little log lines that say that the code is effectively saying, I did this happened, here's some event. And then from looking at that trace, it's almost the history of what has happened within the program. You can go back and trace it out. And so in many ways, it's almost like you're, in a very detailed fashion, instructing someone else for how to perform some process. And you have some understanding of it, and you want to write out all the rules for exactly how it works in every single corner case. And that whenever you see some undesirable outcome, you go back and you say, well, what did I get wrong in the rule book? And you try to really have enough understanding of the trail by which that outcome occurred so that you can go back and make the appropriate changes.
How has vibe coding changed the process?
Vibe coding is a very fascinating moment. And I think that what is happening right now is software engineering is changing entirely. So I remember the first time that I really vibe coded. This was for a live demo of one of our early coding models. We built a little web interface, and you could talk to the model to ask it to write some JavaScript. And so I, on a live stream, had it build a little game and asked the people watching the live stream to suggest a feature. We implemented the feature just by talking to the computer. And to me, the deep thing that's happening is that computers have always been created in order to help humans, right? That's the whole point. and that we contort ourselves to the machine when writing code, whether it's a low-level computer programming language or all this skill and machinery for how you actually tell whether a computer did the thing that you wanted. And what vibe coding is it's moving the machine closer to the human. And so you instruct it. You still need a good, depending on how good the model is, you need, and how difficult the task is, you need some mental model of how it's going to solve the task, right? If you just say, build me an awesome website, well, what is an awesome website? So, okay, fine. I want there to be a button here, or I want there to be this type of functionality. You are effectively acting as not a individual contributor, not a software engineer, but you're acting as a manager, but a manager who's still very accountable for the outcome. And I think what is happening is that the models have been incrementally getting better over the past year in a significant way. And I think there was a real turning point in December of 2025, where it was the first time that for many of the expert engineers that I know, these models went from being kind of nice, kind of useful, to they can actually do incredibly hard pieces of work. And so it's really shifted from being a thing for demos and just, if you don't really know a programming language, you can get something done quickly, but it's not quite right, to this is driving serious work and really accelerating what people can do.
Is there still a reason to code the old way?
I think that coding by hand in some ways is like handwriting, like penmanship, like calligraphy, that there is an art to it and that there's an understanding of how everything fits together by operating at that level. There's a way in which it's like mathematics, where you still really want to load, even if you're not going to do a bunch of hand calculations, you probably should still know how to do long multiplication. And there's something about what coding is really about is understanding abstraction, right? It's really about understanding how systems fit together, how pieces will interoperate. And that is something that you want to become an expert at. And so if you're too far from the details and that you're just pushing a system and you don't really understand how it works on the inside, I think that that is a limiting factor. As the models get better, I think that the nature of what you as a human need to really take accountability for and responsibility for will change. The machine will be much better at a bunch of the mechanical things, a bunch of the design things, how interfaces work. Each of those will come over time. But at the end of the day, it's your vision. And that if you care about how your vision is implemented, then knowing the nuts and bolts of how the machine is going to do it, at least having a good mental model of it, that is something that will pay dividends.
Can you see a time when that won't be necessary? You tell the machine what you want, it codes it the way it wants, and you can still do iterations and improve it. But is there a time when the act of coding will be maybe like Latin is today?
I think of it almost like an ocean that is rising, right? Where the ocean level is the capability of the models, and you have these islands, and that every so often an island gets totally covered by the water, but there's other islands that are even higher. And I think that coding is like that, where the islands are difficulty of problems. And so I think what we're seeing is some islands have already been covered. That, for example, I have a test prompt that I've used for every model for a number of years to build a particular website that was one of the first websites I ever built. When I first built it by hand, it took me months. Then when I used an early one of our Codex models, it probably took me 5 hours, 6 hours, something like that. With our latest model, it just codes it up in a minute. And I just don't even have to touch the details. And it actually does a much better job than I ever did, even with the previous iterations.
That's really interesting.
You really feel the power of what is at your fingertips and the fact that you are now empowered to do even more.
Yeah.
But there are still mountains that we have not covered. And the question is, are those mountains infinite or finite? And I do think that maybe the best analogy for where we're going is that people are going to become, rather than individual contributors, they'll become managers of agents, and then they'll become middle managers, right? Moving up the food pyramid, eventually become CEOs of this organization of agents. And one thing that I actually don't have an answer for is, yes, all the mechanical skill, all of the deep debugging, all of the architecture, all of these things, those you can see how the machine will get very, very good at that. But owning the outcome, right? The accountability, the picture of, is this doing what you want? I don't see a line of sight, not to say that it can never happen, but I don't know how that is something that you would ever transition out of the human. And I think that that is something that is deeply human and sort of something that is unique to being a person with an intention, with a life, with relationships. And so I think that there is an involvement in the process that you will always care about. And just like if you're someone who is having a house built, you may not care that much about where every nail is going, but you care a lot about the outcome, and you care a lot about, are the people building it doing it in a way that you'd be happy with? Because you're the one who, at the end of the day, if it's built poorly, is going to be on the hook.
How different is a poorly built model versus a well-built model in terms of how it functions? In other words, if you can describe something that you want to work a certain way, and if it works that way, and if the code is done elegantly, if you were to do it yourself, and maybe less elegantly if the machine were to do it, but it still did the thing you wanted it to do, would it matter?
So this is something we see very concretely within OpenAI. And we are taking a very agent-first approach to software development.
What does that mean?
We have set a goal that by March 31st, so very soon, that we want two things. One is that the default tool that all of our people reach for is an agent rather than a text editor or a terminal. So really that this becomes the tool that you find the most reliable and the first thing you apply to every problem. The second is that the default way that people use these tools is something that has been explicitly evaluated as safe and secure. And that those two factors, to me, are what it means to be agent first. So it doesn't mean that you never go into the details, but it means that most of the time you don't have to, and that you've built both trust with the system, but also that we've architected in a way so that we can have trust in the whole organization as an outcome. Now, if you drill into some of the individual points of how we direct people, one of the hard decisions was really about how do you make sure that the code base doesn't turn into AI slop, stuff that works, but somehow is just not very good. And we have many years of making sure that it doesn't turn into human slop, right? That we have individuals who write code, and then you have people who review code, and that you have a large system of incentives for if you're writing good code that over time is something that is maintainable and other people can build on, then you get promotions, and that you have good performance reviews and all of these things. And we need to bring this to bear in the agent world. And so that we have a mantra of say no to slop, so that we tell all the human reviewers that there's still, whoever is submitting the code needs to be accountable for it. You as a reviewer should hold an even higher bar than you would for a human on quality. Make sure that the person actually understands what's there. Doesn't mean that every single line that they really know, but that they can really sign off and say, yes, this improves our code base rather than regresses it. And one of our best engineers, as he's been playing with these models, has found that the way he wants to balance is that he wants to control the interfaces. So he goes and still writes by hand, here's the components, here's how they fit together, maybe here's the file structure, but the details of how it gets implemented, which often are quite intricate and complicated, those he outsources to the machine. And so I think that the difference is really, if you don't pay attention to a particular aspect of what the model's doing, will it be something when you look under the hood that you're proud of? And that right now we're evaluating that. We're seeing in what circumstances the answer is yes versus no, but we're saying that our requirement is that if someone does go look, that the answer should always be yes, I am proud of this. Or alternatively, you can have some sections of code that you don't care if they're good or not, as long as they meet the correctness specification. And so if you have good ways of verifying that that section is correct, then you can have very highly optimized code that's extremely hard for anyone to build on. But you don't think of it as the way that we think about code as this evolving artifact. You view it as a one-off, okay, I produce this, I'll produce a totally different version, but never build on top of it.
Is most of what's happening like building blocks being made, and then maybe the way they link together is more casual?
Yes.
Would that be a way to describe it?
I think that's a pretty good way to describe it. And I think what's going to happen is that the size of the building blocks is going to increase over time. Mm-hmm. And that way in which the human oversees is also going to move up that level of abstraction over time. Because right now you look at every individual agent, that's going to feel totally barbaric and slow in even just this year, because you'll want an overseer agent that's looking at the work of all these different ones and flags to you, this particular detail doesn't look quite right over here. This agent seems to have gone off the rails. This, doesn't look like what you wanted. And so I think that really figuring out how do you as a human manage a larger and larger fleet of agents. And in many ways, it's really about the fundamental measure is how much compute does an individual human marshal? That is going to be the most important metric for future productivity.
What would you say the biggest technological revolutions you've witnessed over the course of your life? Each one.
Well, I remember growing up in North Dakota and reading like a Time magazine article about Silicon Valley and feeling like I was born too late. All the exciting things.
That was already happening.
It was happening and I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I was too young. It just felt like there's only so many good ideas in the world, only so much innovation that's possible. And I can see it happening right now, and I am not part of it. So that was a moment that I felt the FOMO. I felt like, wow, I don't think I'll ever see anything like this again.
Yeah.
And I remember later things like mobile phones and the shift there. That was never something I was very passionate about. Like there are a lot of people wanted to build apps. For me, it never really felt like the thing that I was deeply attracted to. And I think that there's so many different pieces of technology that add up to modern life. Think about, for example, Uber. Imagine describing Uber to someone in like 1950, right? To Alan Turing when he's writing his paper on AI, right? So you got to explain computers, you have to explain the internet, you have to explain GPS, you have to explain so many things. And then the net effect of all of this crazy technological innovation is so that you can get a car to you in a few minutes. And in some ways it feels like a trivial outcome, but in some ways it's so deep. And you realize that all these magical pieces of technology, and they truly are magic, right? If you rewind it before them, that they would feel almost impossible. But now we take them for granted. And now we can use them to just make our lives sometimes more convenient, but sometimes it's to really enhance us and to accelerate us. And to me, that was the underlying theme of each piece of technology that we've created.
In each of the pioneering situations that you've been involved in, how much do you know in advance of what it's going to be?
I would say I always go in with a vision, right? I always go in with thinking about just set aside all the reasons this might fail. Just dream
what
of
it can be.
What it can be, like what is even possible, right? Within the laws of physics, right? There's no point in dreaming of the impossible, but how it could go. And I think that Stripe was like that, of thinking about, well, we could build something that will be this amazing payment behemoth, right? That actually makes payments more accessible. And make payments more accessible, more things happen.
Yeah. That
sounds great. And the people there, great people, you can learn and grow together and you could do more things in the world. So that to me was something that felt like, okay, I see what this could be in that way. Many details to be figured out. OpenAI, you think about AGI, it's like if you can actually build an AGI into existence in a way that lifts up everyone, there's no better thing to work on, right? That is the most amazing thing you could hope to do in a technological sense. And then for projects within OpenAI, I think usually it has the same kind of flavor to it, where I remember there are moments where I see a demo or I see a result, you see a little initial curve, and you just realize this is gonna work. I remember at some point actually, Wojciech, one of my co-founders, saying that the thing about this field that is so remarkable is every idea works, right? As long as it's theoretically motivated, the math works, it's gonna happen, right? It will actually succeed, you'll actually get good results. But the challenge is really figuring out which ones are going to the fastest path to your objective. And so it really feels like there's fruit lying on the ground. And because it's all lying on the ground, sometimes that's the challenge. There's such a massive opportunity space. But figuring out the path through, you need these proof points. And I think we're sitting in the middle of one right now.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear with these agents getting so good at not just software, but they're going to get very good at all knowledge work. I think this year we're going to have a very big transition in how work is done.
I think it's one of the biggest issues with AI in general is that because it's so open-ended what it can do, it's hard for people to imagine what it's going to do. It's the tool that can do anything.
Yes.
It's hard.
That's right. Yeah, we have this problem with ChatGPT, right? You show up at ChatGPT, there's a text box that can do anything.
Yeah.
But what do you want it to do? Many people just, you're stuck on the blank page. And I think that actually, the dual of it shows the opportunity with AI. And I think that ultimately AI, in my mind, AI is opportunity. Like that is why we build it. The opportunity is that if you do have a vision, if you do have something you want, if you do have a particular way you think things should be done, if you have agency that you wish to see enacted in the world, we have the tool for you. There's lots of questions as these tools get better, like where do the humans fit in? What does it mean to be human? All these things. And I think that agency, that drive, that vision, those things, those are something that we as humans have to contribute.
Yeah. What is AGI, and is it very clearly delineated?
I think of AGI as not just a system that can do any intellectual task that humans can do, but that can really be this force multiplier for an individual human to the extent that they can operate as the visionary, as the CEO. And so that it's that level of empowerment for the individual. And to me, it's really not just the technical abstraction of this system that theoretically could do something, it's how it's actually deployed into the world.
That's a new definition.
Yes. It's how I've grown to think about it.
Yeah.
Because if you look at our mission, it's not just a technical problem, right? You can define the technical AGI, but I think from the very, very beginning of OpenAI, we were unsatisfied with the idea that we would just write papers, right? You could write all the papers you want that describe how an AGI would be built, but there's no impact. Right? The impact is the instantiation into people's lives. And I think that what super intelligence will be is something beyond that signpost and capability. And I think that the outcomes we want from it are to help us solve problems that are totally out of our reach.
Great.
Right. And I think that solving diseases, I think that space travel, I think that there's many, many problems that we see.
Is ChatGPT the primary product of OpenAI?
No.
What is?
The thing that we ultimately are selling is intelligence on demand for your problem. ChatGPT is one instantiation of that, and it's massively popular. Almost 1 billion active users every single week. But that's not the end of it. We have an API that many business customers build on top of, and that is also growing absolutely phenomenally. Our newest product is called Codex, and it's transforming how software is built within OpenAI and really within the industry as a whole. And that, again, is something that we're just seeing this takeoff. And the thing about what Codex is, it's really two things. It is a general purpose agent harness, so that's able to use tools for any kind of tools, any kind of application. And it's a system that knows how to write code. But if you think about that first thing, that is extremely valuable and repurposable for any knowledge work task you might want. Anything you might want to do with your computer can be expressed in terms of an agent doing some things, orchestrating some tools. And so we're starting to apply it to things like Excel, PowerPoint, being able to create these artifacts that people in business produce in various business functions. And we're spending a lot of time to actually make our model very, very capable at this. And so I think what we're going to see by end of year is a very different product surface where every knowledge worker will have this tool that really gives them superpowers.
What is agentic AI?
I would think of agentic AI as a model that you don't just talk to like in chat, but that it's hooked up to tools. And that at an implementation level, it's almost like the model, it can chat with you, the human, but it can also chat with the system. And it can say, please run this command. Please create this spreadsheet. Please look this thing up in someone's email. So it needs access to the outside world. It's actually able to take action. It's not just like ChatGPT, its impact is more cerebral, right? It's you talk to it, it talks back to you. For agentic AI, that it's actually embedded in the real world and can take action. But one thing to note about agents is that we've been increasing the time that an agent can run quite significantly. So you can have agents now that do useful work over the course of a day. And the space of how you apply agents is very large because you can apply lots of compute in parallel. You can have many agents that are working on one task and that are able to produce things that would take humans very, very long time to do.
Tell me a bit about the mechanics of ChatGPT. How does it work?
At the core, ChatGPT is powered by a language model. And you should think of a language model as a system that takes in some text and then outputs some other text. Now, the text doesn't need to be literally English language. It can be images, it can be videos, it can be really any sort of modality. And the output, similarly, doesn't need to be literally.
So it's not just language.
It's not just language.
How long has it not just been language?
Well, to be fair, even from the very beginning, it wasn't just language because there was
Really?
code. You could do code,
I see.
right? But it was always text. That was what we started with. So GPT-4, we had a downstream project of that called GPT-4V, which was the first time that we had vision and that you could have a model that would actually recognize images, and you'd put text in and images in and it would output text. And since then, we've trained models that take in sound, take in images, take in text, output sound, et cetera, et cetera. And so you actually can have a full voice conversation with models that we have produced. And that's part of ChatGPT as well. And so I think of it as these models are general purpose intelligence processors. And when you create them, the way that you train them is that they look at data, but they don't really learn the data. They learn the underlying rules that created the data. And so that's what makes them smart, is that they're sort of general purpose understanding machines, and that you can point them towards whatever task you have representative data, information, training for.
Do you have a name for the big brain?
Well, we have names for our different models. So we call...
But the models are the use part of it. But the thing that learns everything.
We don't have a name for the overall training system. So there's names for various components. For example, we have a training system that does a component of the system. We have different systems for how we actually take a trained model and serve it. But now also training and inference are starting to come together because you do reinforcement learning where the model teaches itself, similar to what Turing was talking about.
Oh.
And so there's kind of an overall orchestration system. And each of these components, they have their own names, they have their own concepts. And there's really a whole industry that's built up around how to train models for helping people in particular ways.
Is all of the knowledge in one big base, and then is it divided up to do these different things?
So we thought that an AGI would be literally one giant model. Mm-hmm. And you come up with these architectures that there's this thing called mixture of experts, for example, where you think of it as it has, rather than every time you're running information through the network, that it runs through just smaller parts of the network. And so there's an opportunity during the training process to specialize. Mm-hmm. So that the training process could choose to say, well, I want to specialize this for language and this for text or this for programming. In reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But I would say that the big unlock has been to realize that, well, the most useful tools that humans are creating for language and for vision and things like that are models. And these big models, they're expensive to run, but they can use tools. So why not use smaller models too? And so I think that we're heading towards a world of this menagerie of different models. And you're seeing this almost Cambrian explosion right now in the field of all these open source models people are training, and that we train models of all sorts of different sizes. And so there's not really just one system anymore, that there's these models that can talk to other models and that are specialized for different purposes. And that really introduces a diversity of approach and means that you can specialize in all sorts of different ways.
What is pre-training and what's post-training?
I would think of pre-training as a phase where the model observes the world and learns from it. At a technical level, the way that we implement it is with what we call next step prediction. So you show a model a sequence and you ask what should come next. And that sequence could be anything. For example, it could be a public post for some site on the internet. And so what is the word the human would write next here? It could be Einstein's thoughts. It could be something very deep and significant. And if you think about it, if you can predict every word out of Einstein's mouth, you are at least as smart as Einstein. And the important thing here is that what the model is incentivized to do is to learn not just where the nouns are, where the commas go, those kinds of surface statistics. It is incentivized to learn the underlying rules of this distribution. Like, where does this data come from? Why is it here? Because if you're just sort of parroting back what someone else said, it's not going to be helpful as soon as you're looking at something new, which is what these models are trained to do. It's really about the underlying rules and generation and deeply understanding any new situation that the model's placed in. So that's what pre-training is. And at a technical level, it is a extremely interesting problem that you scale these up to massive numbers of compute devices, that the actual problem that you have to solve is you put data through the network, then you pass it backwards. So you kind of see, how do I have to adjust all the connections in order to have gotten a slightly better answer from the forward? right? So the idea is as you pass data through, you get to some prediction, some output, and then you see, okay, it's almost like if you have all of these wires that are connected to produce some result, and how do you adjust the tautness of all these wires in order to have gotten a slightly better result? And that's how the machine is ultimately programmed, is that you do this forward, you do this backward, and then you have a step called an optimizer step, where you adjust all those parameters and you do it again and again and again. You do this at very large scale. And so any individual data point, even any individual large source of data, doesn't really matter, right? Because you're talking humanity scale learning. This thing is observing the whole world. It's a little bit like if there was some part of your childhood that you forgot, like you're not going to forget all this knowledge. Like it's like really about the underlying background understanding of reality. So that's pre-training. And at a technical level, you slice up this computation across many devices, and you're just always trying to pump more efficiency and trying to get, it's not just larger models, we also have all sorts of innovations on architecture so that we have models that are shaped in different ways, and you map those. A lot of the engineering challenge is trying to understand how the hardware works, where its weaknesses are, how it fails, and then how do you design the architectures in a way that are most amenable to that. So the output of pre-training, and usually these runs could be a month, they could be multiple months. Maybe our longest one was somewhere around 9 months. Big team of people in order to keep that thing running. GPT-4, for example, I was very involved in the pre-training and built a lot of that training stack. 2 a.m. we'd wake up because the run was down, go and fix it. Like that's what you got to do. And it's like every hour that the job is down, every minute that it's down, you just look at the number of GPUs that are sitting idle and you think about how many dollars are being wasted. But more importantly, just that you're
missed opportunity.
It's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And you really feel that in a very concrete way.
And then the post-training.
Post-training, you take the output of pre-training. So you take this model that knows a lot of things, it's seen the world, and you try to tell it how it should use that knowledge. What's the right behavior in different circumstances? So it's almost like when you have a child that's observed the world and learned a lot, 20 years old, now it's time to go to college. Now you specialize and teach for a specific domain. But one thing that's different about these models is you're not putting new knowledge in necessarily. You're really almost pruning down what it already knows, because the amount of compute in the pre-training process versus in the post-training process is typically very, very out of balance. So the post-training process, usually a couple days, that kind of thing. And a lot of how we teach the model, we've evolved these techniques, but classically we would do it through feedback, that we would have some way of saying that, well, let's train a reward model. So another AI that can judge what this AI is doing. And you train that one usually through saying these are good, these are bad, or here's 2 possible generations from an AI, which one's better than the other. And then this reward model judges the pre-trained model and then gives it feedback. And from there, it's able to shape its behavior. And so we really have the ability to take this model that knows kind of everything. I remember talking to Alec Radford, who is one of our researchers, who would describe it as these pre-trained models, they're less like a human and more like a humanity, like everything's in there. And then we do our best to steer it. We don't always get it right, but I think that's a lot of what we've been working on and improving.
So the pre-training is like the Library of Congress, let's say.
I'd say pre-training is like the Library of Congress, and then post-training is almost taste, giving the machine a sense of which of those books it would like or what to do with that information once it's retrieved.
For pre-training, where's all the information coming from? Is it the internet?
I would think of the classic approach has been publicly available data on the internet. What's been changing is that as these AIs have gotten much smarter, that actually you really want to train them on their own data in some form. For example, reinforcement learning, where the machine goes out and tries to solve a task. And you learn.
Everything it learns in trying to solve the task is now part of its knowledge base.
That's the idea.
That's really
exactly.
good.
And again, it's not just the knowledge itself, it's also the skills, right? And that's what we're really getting at. Like our dream has always been to have a reasoning model that is just a pure reasoner and that is able to, in any new situation, be able to figure out the right thing to do and to do a great job there. And sometimes having background knowledge is helpful, but it's really about those smarts and the ability to adapt very quickly that is like the real thing that delivers the value.
How much of the human hand is involved in the post-training?
It's been changing as well. It really used to be that we would have these large campaigns, and sometimes we still do, but that most of the data that we would train on would be, we would have humans who would painstakingly label these different examples. And the thing is that as the tasks that the models are capable of has gone up, there's way less to learn from most examples. So you really need domain experts who are deep in their field. And so some of the tasks that we produce are these like incredibly complicated, like look up, this finance report from this specific year and judge how this one compares to that one. What does it mean for the strength of the business? Like paragraphs of prompt with a very specific answer, and it requires some domain expertise to do and require a dozen hours from that domain expert to accomplish. So we've really moved up the sophistication of the task and the way that we teach the machine. And it makes sense, right? As the machines get smarter, we really need to figure out where are they breaking down. And it becomes much less about massive volumes of data and much more about this very high taste, very targeted, like what are the most important problems that we want this AI to solve, and trying to then teach the machine accordingly.
My takeaway from the AlphaGo story was that the computer made a move that no human would have made, and that's why it won.
Yes.
And if you're teaching the AI how to act more responsibly as a human, wouldn't that undermine its ability to make the move that the human wouldn't make? And doesn't that undermine the whole AI premise?
So the objective of our research in many ways is to achieve that type of AlphaGo moment, but in science, in coding, in these other domains, because that is exactly what you want, is you want new knowledge discovery. And you're exactly right. If all you're doing is just learning from what's been done, it feels like, how are you going to go further? But the thing that perspective misses is that the way that we are now extending the training to reinforcement learning. So it's not just take the public data, take the humans providing yes and no, but actually have tools that let you test things out in the world. Like, how do humans discover new things? Sometimes we think deep thoughts, but I think that usually it's through experiment, right? As we tried something, it didn't really work. We realized, oh, and I think that part of what's going on is the universe is almost this massive computer, and that it has far more compute in it than our brains do. It has far more compute in it than our GPUs do. Yeah. And so that's why there's something to be learned from experiment, because there's this computational process that is just unimaginable in terms of how sophisticated it is, and that you can kind of shape it to your will, right? You can kind of have a ball that rolls down a incline of this height and that height. And then if the AI is able to propose that experiment and see the experimental results, maybe it has a robot that sets that up for it, maybe it's a human who performs it, either way, that is how you can actually discover new knowledge. And I think that the idea of actually have experiment and then be able to compress all of this into this model, and for it to understand the underlying rules of how all that data was generated, that is something that we are just starting to see the fruits of.
If the AI proved something in physics that negates what's in the current textbooks, is that a safety problem or is that a breakthrough?
It's already happened.
Tell me the story.
So there's a physics professor who has been a vocal skeptic of AI.
Yes.
And we convinced him to use our latest unreleased AI system. And he gave it a particular hypothesis in quantum physics that he's been planning on working on this whole year with his collaborators. It's a very hard problem that people are pretty sure that there's a particular answer to it.
Yeah.
And our AI proved that actually the opposite was true. And his reaction was that this is the first time that it's felt like the system is thinking, right? There's new knowledge in there. There's something very, very novel. And that paper, submitting it to be published, but I think it's a very significant moment and very representative of things to come.
Yeah, I think the most potential in AI is when it does things that humans don't know is the right answer.
Yes.
That's what's exciting.
It is.
And if the corporate perspective is to prevent that from happening, which I could see an argument for, we can't rock the boat. This is accepted. The science is accepted. It's where I get most concerned about AI. The biggest potential downside is that it can't do what it's able to do?
I think this is a really important point. And I think that the bigger framework around it really is that this technology, we have the ability to steer it. And that's actually one of the deep motivations for why we created OpenAI, is that AGI, I think it will happen with or without us, but we think that we can help be an influence on it playing out in a direction that we think is more positive for the world, and that is our ambition and our aspiration. I think there's a lot of value to be delivered by the actual creation of the technology. The core really being that we think it's something that should be available to everyone, and it should be something that, just like humans can question the wisdom, and it's always tough when humans question the wisdom, right? There's a lot of antibodies that try to prevent that, but that is also how society moves forward. And I think that we're going to have to make choices as a society. It's not just for any one company, any one individual to decide. It's something that as a society, we should decide what are the rules of the road. And a lot of how we've thought about it is there should be broad bounds that society decides an AI can never cross. Within that you really need people to have the empowerment to pick. That people need to have an AI that can represent them, whether it's about their values or whether it's about being able to question. And there may be contexts where people don't want that. That should be their right. That should be their choice. And there should be contexts where people are trying to discover new science or whatever it is, and that should also be their choice. And I think that we really have this philosophy, and it's very different from others in the field, of self-empowerment, and that this technology really is for everyone.
Is there an AI bubble?
I think that we will find that we were under-ambitious on compute.
Yeah.
I think that where we are going, and we're seeing the proof points of it, is a world where knowledge work is amplified by compute power. I saw someone tweet saying, if you're taking a job, ask how many tokens are in your budget. It's kind of a joke right now. It's not going to be a joke later this year. And I think that the degree to which these tools are changing software engineering, like the software engineers who have not tried this don't feel it yet. But those who have, they feel it. They feel it in their bones. And I think that we're going to see that across finance. We'll see this in sales. And people will be able to do so much more. And what we're already seeing is individuals within OpenAI who want 100 GPUs, 1,000 GPUs dedicated just to them.
Yeah.
And if you think about 1,000 GPUs for an individual, if you have 1,000 such individuals, you're at 1 million GPUs already. And there's not 10 million GPUs in existence. So you can only scale so far. So I think that we are in a world where we are seeing what's coming, what this technology is capable of. When we look at how good the models are getting, when we see our own revenue curves, and we look at the things we cannot launch because we do not have the compute for it, all of these things together mean that it is actually quite rational why all of the hyperscalers, why we are all trying to build compute. Like, I think where we're going is compute will be a basic human right. Like, I think that people, to be economically productive and even for their own lives, the more compute they have, the higher quality of life they can have. And so I think we're going to have to be in a world where everyone has access to compute.
Will it always be GPUs, or might something replace the GPU?
I think that compute is fundamental and that the computer is always changing. And we're already seeing lots of different approaches. And even NVIDIA, for example, has acquired Grok, which is a different approach to a compute device. And there's lots of interesting approaches people are taking. And so I think that GPU is a good stand-in for the different types of accelerators. We ourselves, for example, have a custom accelerator that we're working on called Intelligence Processor. And I think that there is lots of room to improve the efficiency and scalability of this technology.
What's the most expensive part of the whole operation?
Compute.
Compute. Where does electricity fit in?
I'd say you can almost think of AI as a manufacturing process from electricity to intelligence, and that we use electricity as one input to how we actually do the computation. So electricity is almost like the water that drives the whole system.
Does it get more and more efficient over time?
Yes. But one note is that we also, as we increase the efficiency, and we increase it a lot, like if you look year over year, we tend to cut our prices for the same level of intelligence by 100x sometimes. Like literally, like you can just see it from our price drops.
Yeah.
So like where we were for GPT-3 in 2020, and that was a 175 billion parameter model. You can get that level of intelligence. I haven't even looked, but billion parameter model, something like that. Like it's something that you could run on your phone for free, no problem whatsoever.
OpenAI versus Anthropic versus Gemini versus Grok versus DeepSeek. Tell me about what's different about those companies.
For me, I really focus on us. Like I think that what competitors are helpful for is almost as like a pace card, just to get a sense of how you're doing. Sometimes they can point out that, oh, here's a particular feature that we didn't think we could implement. They did it. Okay, we could probably do it. So I think it's helpful for that. But the way that we've always proceeded is that we invest the most in basic research, in the actual paradigm shifts. And you can see this where with language models, with the reinforcement learning paradigm, and I think there's upcoming paradigms too, that we are embracing and capturing and really put long-term investments in. And I think that is one thing that really stands out. It's actually interesting. I had a candidate today who we're pitching him on a long-term research project. And he was saying, oh, I was surprised. I thought from the outside, it looks like you guys are always doing things fast. And I didn't realize that you make these long-term investments. And the reason that it looks like that is because we have a pipeline of them and they come to fruition one by one. And I think we have the smartest models, right? If you look at the reinforcement learning stack, I think we have something that is very unique and new. And I think each company has its own niche. Like I think when it came to consumer, ChatGPT is by far used the widest. I think Google did a very good job last year of building better models than they had previously, and that they have a natural distribution. Like it's very always front and center to me, the fact that Google is like, they have a lot of compute, they have a lot of talent, they have a lot of users, they have a lot of these natural advantages. And I think that Anthropic is coming on the scene and they've focused very hard on coding. And one thing that I think that they did well was that we were focused on the benchmarks in some ways. We were focused on academic programming competitions. We had amazing numbers there, but we didn't focus as much on how these models will be used in the world.
I see.
And so training on these like messy repos and how people are actually using it. And that was a lesson that we were delayed on, but we gathered a team, focused very hard on that. I think we are caught up, and I think that people are really seeing the fact that we are definitely on takeoff.
So in some ways, having the other companies does give you an idea of other things to be focusing on. It's a big picture.
That's right. And there's so much in this world, like the whole space of knowledge work is so large that figuring out exactly what to focus on is sometimes the hardest problem.
Since everybody's models are being optimized, it seems, for the same benchmarks, does that end up being a limitation on what's being done because everyone's focusing on this small group of tests?
It can be, and I think it has been in the past. If you look at where things are going, I think that we are in a bit of a post-benchmark world. What really matters is ultimately the benchmark of, are people actually using it?
Yeah.
Is your revenue growing? Like those kinds of benchmarks that are impossible to gain. Because the problem with the academic benchmarks is they're very easy to get 100% on them, right? You just train on the test set, right? You contaminate. The numbers on their own don't necessarily mean much. So sometimes you'll see a model from a particular company or a particular model comes out and it's got really good numbers that are too good to be true. And it always is.
Would there be an argument to not participate in the benchmark tests?
So actually there's two answers. One is that the way that we develop these models is through very good evals, so that we actually do want benchmarks that tell us, they're never perfect, they're always proxy metrics, but that really tell us, are we on track? So we've made a system called GDP-val, for example, that's an eval that shows how useful our models are on a number of knowledge work tasks. And that hill climbing on that is actually great. At some point, you'll saturate, and usually once you start getting to 80% on these benchmarks or something, 90%, usually it means that you're done and there's no point in getting to 100% because usually that means you're doing something very specific for this benchmark that doesn't make sense. And so I think it's as long as you're in this range where it's like giving you meaningful signal, fantastic. And you don't want to focus on too many of them because I think that there's usually, you want well-constructed benchmarks that give you some good signal. In previous years, there have been times when actually the right answer was you take an average across a bunch of benchmarks that are themselves not that good, and then that gives you actually a pretty good, reliable signal too. So, but I think that the important thing is that you don't wake up every day thinking about how do I move the number on this benchmark? You use it as a proxy, use it as a side metric, and if you focus on it too much, then you can, what we call good heart it.
What do developers do? And are they assigned jobs, or do the developers pitch you ideas?
So two big aspects to what we do. There's research and deployment. In research, we are creating new models, and that requires both research and engineering to be joined at the hip. In deployment, that is usually about taking the fruits of research and bringing it to the world. There's a very high bias of engineering, but you need to be high context. You need to really understand that research, because if you don't, you're not going to do a good job of bringing it to reality. What the engineers actually do is usually on the research side, that there's some idea that we're pursuing, and that we usually form teams. Sometimes these are very small teams, 2-3 people that are working on some novel idea that's very high risk, may or may not work. And there you just want to get some signs of life, and you need to have enough patience because it never works the first time. Sometimes we know it's working, we already have signs of life, we scale it up. So usually the life cycle of an idea is that once we have an idea, we tried it out, we got the signs of life, we then put more people on it. And a lot of the engineers are focused on the system is breaking too frequently, let's go figure out why, it's too slow, the data that it's importing, we're getting too small of a download rate, like trying to figure out what's going on there. There's often building distributed systems so that we're able to process things or be able to take outputs from the model and be able to observe them and be able to see how things are doing, building dashboards. So there's a lot of work to be done, and the actual ML engineering is a very sophisticated art, and it requires a lot of deep domain expertise. And there aren't that many people who do it. There's writing the actual kernels, so the actual code that runs on the GPU that turns the low-level representations of all this data into objects that can be computed upon. So it's almost like, you think about how your eyes turn visible light into some signal in your brain. And that once you're there, it's almost like we have these people who are doing the low-level neuron engineering. So all of that is very sophisticated, takes a long time to build up the expertise. And there's a lot of techniques that are at that intersection of the machine learning and the engineering. For example, as you scale up the size of the model, the way that people classically did this was wrong, that it turned out that you would get bad results, but you wouldn't always know, right? That should it be the case that as you scale up the model that you get very smooth curves? There's no deep reason a priori that you should think so. But one thing we realized at some point is that actually we need to have different ratios between different parameters to get those things right. And we could develop this technique called MuP for how we set the initialization. And that actually gives you a much more straight line as you go. And so there's a lot of these things where even knowing if something is wrong is not easy. And deep expertise and partnership between people with different expertise is what yields great results.
Have you followed the Clawbot OpenClaw story at all?
Of course.
Tell me your thoughts.
I love it. So I think that, and I know I've spent time with Peter. I think he's great. He was the developer of OpenClaw. And to me, OpenClaw encompasses two things. First of all, it is a AI system that you can hook up tools, and then it is always on and runs and is able to take action. And I think that there's a hacker spirit that I really like about it, of saying, we have these tools, we have these models, there's this massive overhang, they're so much more capable than what we're using it for.
Yeah.
Let's try, let's see what it can do. And there's a second thing too, which is that there's a gap that we have to fill of what I call the security architecture, right? The trust architecture of, well, you have an AI that's hooked up to many things, but how do you know it's going to do the right thing? How do you know that it will send the right messages? And people will post things on Twitter that are kind of fun, like someone who his wife was texting him and his Clawbot replied, and it's 2 a.m. and the baby's crying and the Clawbot's replying and the wife isn't having it. It's kind of funny to read the text, but you think about where this goes, we need better guardrails, right? We need systems that are engineered for trust and safety. And that's a lot of what we focus on, right? That we really think about not just let's build the technology, make the capability, but how do we actually bring this to the world in a scalable way, that we're transforming our own enterprise on the basis of this technology. We want to help transform every enterprise. And so a lot of how we're thinking about this is that I think it's a great sign of things to come. And I think that to really scale it to everyone requires making it incredibly easy for people to set up, but also making sure that the default way that things are done is safe. And that is something that we are investing in pretty heavily. And there were deep choices that we made. For example, there's one vision of how you could build AI, rewinding 10 years, which is that you keep it all secret. And then you put together the finishing pieces and no one knows that you're doing it. So you have no pressure to deploy. So you really have time to like get it all right. And then you push the button and, question mark, but then, benefit the world. And I always looked at that plan and I was like, I don't think I can sign up for this. It just feels wrong. First of all, from a technical perspective, if you've never encountered reality, how will you be certain that you actually have put in place the right safety systems? You think about CloudBot, it's nice that it's starting as kind of a fun project. It's clear that for it to get hooked up to very sophisticated, important systems and being trusted with a lot of responsibility, we need to develop new technology, but we're going to learn and iterate in a loop. And so to me, it always felt important to get this technology right. We have to encounter reality at each step along the way. But the second is legitimacy, that you really, if you're going to build technology that's going to change everyone's lives, I think people need to know about it, right? People need to be included in that. And so if you look at ChatGPT, we made a very deliberate decision to say, we think that this is technology for the world to be included in, for our ethos, for what we started this company for.
It's for everybody.
Yes.
Tetragrammaton is a podcast. Tetragrammaton is a website. Tetragrammaton is a whole world of knowledge.
What may fall within the sphere of Tetragrammaton? Counterculture? Tetragrammaton. Sacred geometry? Tetragrammaton. The avant-garde? Tetragrammaton. Generative art? Tetragrammaton. The tarot? Tetragrammaton. Out-of-print music? Tetragrammaton. Biodynamics? Tetragrammaton. Graphic design? Tetragrammaton. Mythology and magic? Tetragrammaton. Obscure film? Tetragrammaton. Beach culture? Tetragrammaton. Esoteric lectures? Tetragrammaton. Off-the-grid living? Tetragrammaton. Alt spirituality? Tetragrammaton. The canon of fine objects? Tetragrammaton. Muscle cars? Tetragrammaton. Ancient wisdom for a new age. Upon entering, experience the artwork of the day. Take a breath and see where you are drawn.
Tetragrammaton.com